Go.
You're listening to the History Things podcast, a conversational approach to discussing social, industrial, maritime, music, and military history. Join us and our special guests as we dive down the rabbit holes of your favorite stories from the past. Follow the History Things podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or online at Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be sure to leave a review and a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app. Pat and Parker are coming right up. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy the show.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the History Things podcast. I'm Pat McGuire. We're coming in jamming out a little bit here. The Virginia Company, that's 9 Points of Roguery, Drowsy Maggie. I'm a big fan of the drums in that. I asked our guest today to send me some music that would go with this episode, and this was the track that came. And I gotta say, it's a fucking banger. It's a fucking banger right out of the gate.
Glad you like it.
Ladies and gentlemen, joining me as always is the ambassador down from Maine, the wilderness. I always forget to ask, are you coastal Maine or are you okay? So you're not like interior lumber, you're more lobster than lumber?
Yeah, I'm right in the, well, yes, I guess.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, Parker Russell joins us. Say hey, Parker Russell.
Hello. Hey, Parker Russell.
Hey, Parker Russell. I'm excited to get into today's episode. You know, we've only covered this subject, I believe, twice on the show now. In season 2, we talked about where I work for a living.
Right.
With my friend and now my boss, Rob Ambrose. And I believe we had Kyle Dalton, who, you know, on one of his annual visits to our show, blew us away about sailors that joined us on the Braddock expedition. So obviously, if you've been paying attention, we are here today to once again visit the subject of the French and Indian War. And as somebody who likes to lean into what I believe is personally the best advice I've ever gotten in my life, which was use the resources around you, I'm going to tap into some of those resources once again, and we're going to go right to where I work. Joining us today is a friend of mine. I've known him for a few years now, but really got to know him over the last year working directly at Fort Frederick with him. He's been a public interpreter there. He is a student of the French and Indian War. He is a high school teacher, so he's doing the good works there. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most tremendous storytellers I've had the privilege of meeting and getting to know over the last several years, Jacob Davis. Welcome to the History Things podcast.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Too much hype now.
No, that's going to be the end of it.
Yeah.
You're taking shells the rest.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm excited that you came, man. Thank you so much for driving all the way out here.
Happy to be here.
I know it's a bit of a hike, and you're also here at the end of a school day too. So like
the end of a school day.
At the end of a school year.
At the end of a school year.
How fried? How fried?
I'm there. I'm ready for the end of this week. Ready for the school week to be over, and to get back to doing silly things with you at Fort Frederick.
Well, by the time you're listening to this episode, his school year has ended, and we've been in the fort for about a month, so hopefully you're coming out to see us.
We'll make an addendum where it's like, I'm ready to strangle
yeah,
Pat McGuire.
Dude, cut in the August part of this when we've been outside in 100 degrees. That's right. Well,
nice.
So one of the most really neat things I've kind of experienced about you, even when I met you first, was you take the 18th century very seriously. It is kind of your bread and butter. And then in the last year of getting to know you, you said something that has kind of just like remained in my like data bank about who you are as a person. Everybody's got this niche thing, right? They like a lot of history. They like focus on certain things a little bit here and there, but it's like your thing is a very rare thing when you consider how Americans really like to study history, even when it comes to 18th century studies. Your thing is like the Maryland provincials.
Oh,
that was like something you said to me, right?
Yeah.
It was like, that was like, I'm from out that way. So can you just tell our listeners, I like everybody to kind of tell us their origin story. Is yours Gettysburg real quick before you tell it? Like, is your, how I got into history?
No.
Okay, good. So
No,
tell our listeners
not.
just sort of how you got into history and how you ended up being not just an 18th century guy, but just like enjoying the subject of the French and Indian War so much.
Yeah. So I grew up in Cumberland, Maryland. And of course, anyone who knows French and Indian War history, 18th century history. Cumberland, Maryland, was originally established as a fortification being built by the British in the in late 1754. But even before that, right there at Wills Creek, where Wills Creek dumps into the Potomac River, is where the Virginia Company. Hence
the music, but see here for me, man. Do you know what I think of immediately when you say Virginia Company?
Yeah, you think of Pocahontas.
100%. The Virginia Company.
And there now you have to pay Disney. I
refuse. This is pirate radio. I pay for nothing.
But and so there was a storehouse where basically it's the Ohio Company of Virginia. Built a storehouse right there on where Wills Creek goes into the Potomac River. And so that's where I grew up, was, in Cumberland, Maryland. I went to Washington Middle School. The opposing middle school on the other side of town was Braddock Middle
nice.
School. So my whole life growing up, seeing Braddock Road, all these other things, lots of things named after Washington. Of course, there was Washington's headquarters, which is, a very poor at this point, a very poor tourist attraction. I don't know, in Cumberland.
Is that little building with like a little, like,
what was that?
Like a little mannequin?
Yeah.
Of George Washington, who's just like sitting back, like.
Yeah, roughly located in that location where the storehouse for the Virginia or the Ohio Company of Virginia was located.
Yes. Okay. I've seen this.
Yeah,
right.
and so kind of growing up with all that kind of stuff, and then also too where I went to high school, the mascot is named the Sentinel, and it's a red-coated soldier.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Crosstown, unfortunately, anyone from Cumberland.
Are you still beefing with your high school beef?
Well, no. So, and then the crosstown rival was the Allegheny Camper, which was a Native American, and so very much sort of surrounded in this history. But no, my entrance into my love of history. I would say it just stemmed from, going to Renaissance festivals at a young age.
That's so much. That's enlightening. Honestly, with as much as we've heard Gettysburg, thank you, Jacob Davis.
No, yeah. So going to Renaissance festivals at a young age, my parents realizing that acknowledging my love of history, really leaning into that, taking me to a lot of stuff, and especially like colonial American history and that sort of thing. Early American history was something that I really loved. And then the other thing too, not Gettysburg, but I was in that sweet spot where when the Patriot came out, I was real big into the Patriot whenever I was in elementary school.
Hell yeah.
And then at that time too, while I was really getting into sort of 18th century history and everything like that as a young child, I would go every President's Day. I would go to Mount Vernon because it was free for people to go to Mount Vernon. So I would go to Mount Vernon whenever I was a wee little lad. A wee little lad. And and so so I've just steeped in it. I remember in fourth grade even people knew how much I loved that era of history. My fourth grade teacher, Miss Hughes, she gave me a book that was all about it was like a picture book, almost like a scholastics kind of book kind of thing. But it was all about 18th century kind of material culture sort of stuff. And then it was around that time as well, whenever my family, we took the family vacation to Colonial Williamsburg. And
hell yeah.
And so so basically it's from a very young age, it's an era that for whatever reason I romanticized, I loved, and just growing up surrounded by all that stuff, all those name places and everything like that. So
a couple of things on that. First of all, one of the things that you might be able to do is help shed some light for me and a lot of our visitors. I'm used to talking.
We're not
to
at
you.
work yet.
I know I'm used to talking in that context to you, our listeners here.
They're visitors.
I'm a visitor.
Thank you for visiting with us.
Yeah, thanks for visiting, everyone. Thanks
Thank
for
you
stopping
for
by.
stopping by.
That's
Don't
right.
forget, while you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Speaking
That's
of
right.
visitors, in a few
Classified information. Classified information.
more to come on that. Anyway, it is super
intrigued.
confusing out there because the historic location, it's cool. I'll tell you about it. but not on the air.
Okay.
I'm waiting for him to tell
Yeah.
me about it too. So
Bated breath.
You already know about it. I was working on it. I was telling you about it when you walked in the door.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, folks,
I get it now.
the location of Fort Cumberland out there.
Okay, yeah.
Was
Oh, yeah.
it was where the current Episcopal Church, like, is it Grace Episcopal Church?
It's Emmanuel Episcopal.
Emmanuel, but that's where it is. So Fort Hill High School,
Mm-hmm.
confusing because that sounds like that would be where the fort went.
Yeah.
So tell me, they're not your rival, by the way? Just,
No,
like Sentinel and the Fort Hill, that would make
no.
perfect sense.
Fort Hill is where the Sentinel. So yeah, so I went to Fort Hill
Oh,
High
you
School.
went to Fort Hill
Yeah,
High
I went to
School.
Fort
Okay,
Hill
my
High School.
bad, my bad.
Yeah, and the Sentinel was our mascot.
So you know all about the confusing, like this fort wasn't actually here.
Yeah, like I think, well, a lot of people, especially too, because the fight song was Anchors Away and it was named Fort Hill. So a lot of
like
people.
Anchors Away, like the Navy
song?
song?
Yeah. So they assumed that, whenever we would go places that we were like some sort of military school or something like that. So that was kind of the thing. I think like most people in Cumberland, like they have some understanding of like where Fort Cumberland was originally located. And like for most, Joe Schmo off the street, like they're just like, oh, it's named Fort Hill or whatever. Like they don't know why.
Dude, I'm not going to lie. That fight song for a high school makes so much more sense if you're near like Annapolis,
Yeah.
somewhere on the bay.
Yeah.
You're
Well,
like the most
Potomac?
near the most landlocked part of the state.
Yeah. Well, because they
Potomac-
I don't think Anchors Away when it comes to the Potomac River.
Well, no, but I mean,
but they changed the lyrics. They changed the the lyrics and everything like that.
paddles
to it.
away.
No, so it was called Over the Top. So and you think about it, like when
Yeah.
you're talking about like Fort Hill, like going over the top, like that kind of stuff.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, and so it was to the tune of Anchors Away.
Are you going to sing it?
No, no.
Okay.
No. But it was, but basically it started over the top. We go and win this game, something like that.
Anyway, so the second thing is,
Anyway.
and this is why, like, I'm excited for this episode. So you grew up in this. This is something that, like, is core. It's like part of the fiber of who you are. And,
Yeah.
And we spent a day at the beginning of our first season together last summer.
Yeah.
Just kind of really getting to know each other. We were talking like philosophies, just growing up in the reenacting world, just like who we were. We were going to work together every day. So it
Yeah.
was kind of like this. Here we are. Finally, we've known each other, but now here we are. Let's get to know each other. And that was when you kind of said to me in the words that, like, this little thing we do at the fort, like, this is your jam. And that stuck with me because, one, it's been an inspiration just to actually, like, get to know you and work with you. You're incredible, mindful, and you're very good with
appreciate that.
detail
Thank
and
you.
things like that. You're also a loser. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But,
Well,
just kidding.
that's a given. I mean,
I'm
just
just
look at
kidding.
me. I mean,
but no, the
And roll credits.
it was just it's I guess I've been around long enough to become jaded about a lot of people that I've known have been involved in history for a long time.
Yeah.
Especially in the Civil War community, there's a lot of people that don't continue to apply themselves, one, to the thing they're studying, which you endlessly do. It is admirable. It is crazy how to, like last summer, we were getting those texts in the middle of the day where you were just like abusing the Maryland Gazette, like for the 50 millionth time. But
yeah.
it was
I have
just-
the Maryland Gazette pulled up right now.
but it was just,
So, yep.
it was one of those things that I thought was really refreshing to see somebody have such a deep passion for something that isn't so popular. Like, I grew up around, that's why I said Gettysburg, is that going to be your thing? Because, like, it's
No.
like, and not to rip people that are
Absolutely
inspired there. Like, you find your inspiration where you do, but, like, so many people are gravitating to these massive magnets in history.
Yeah.
July of 63 in Pennsylvania, all this other stuff. But it's like mid 1750s Western Maryland.
Yeah.
What a really cool niche thing. And so, yeah, so I'm excited to get to it. So today, before we get into it, is anything you want to add about who you are as a historian? Anything you want to caveat before we tell the story? Do you want to just tell our listeners what the story
So
is?
today, we're going to be talking about the Fort Necessity campaign. It's definitely going to be like, because, some people might say like, well, there's like two sides to this and everything like that. And while, I do think I do want to talk a little bit about, obviously, like the French and everything like that. It is going to be a little bit more sort of heavy-handed towards sort of the British perspective.
All right.
And also sort of and more heavy-handed, like specifically to, I would say like Washington's experience on the whole thing.
Well, that's cool.
Because too, it's like obviously, we have the benefit with Washington that he goes on obviously to be, spoiler alert,
Yeah.
goes on to be the first president of the United States, and so like because of that, there's
Strippers are
Wait,
so glad.
Wait,
Right.
what?
all right. I look, I'm sorry. Spoiler.
Man.
And this is 20 years later. But,
He
Is
lives
that
from
why
Maine.
it's-
The news hasn't gotten there yet.
Right.
Is that,
Okay.
is that why I have like a couple of like pictures of him in my wallet?
No,
this
that's
money?
just because
Paul Revere is
one of-
still
one of
telling
those
everyone
types.
the British are coming.
Yeah.
They haven't gotten it.
He's still making his ride.
Anyway.
But obviously with that though, it's like because he's this person that's so obviously like there's all of the documentation, everything like with him is like so well preserved in sort of the documented record and everything along those lines. It's easy to sort of talk about this campaign, especially with sort of Washington at the center of it all.
And I think that's appropriate for our listeners to get to the subject as we experience every day at work. People are vastly unprepared for this subject.
Yeah.
And the easiest things to do to plug them into it are to go to these names that they know, these people, and just be like, hey, we're talking about this guy, but
Right.
as a younger man, change the setting a bit. So I think this is appropriate to start our listeners off with it. And what we'll do is we'll either have you back when you do enough research to speak on behalf of the French, or I'll go dig out somebody from France.
Yeah. Yeah.
See if they're allowed out of the country.
I think digging someone out from like Quebec would be more appropriate than maybe digging someone out from France. But
well, you're right. Yeah. I also am just happy you said it right.
yeah,
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Because I love the Canadians. Love you,
absolutely.
Canada.
Love the Quebecois.
That's right. So, all right. So we
Give it
are.
Leroy. I don't know something.
We're going to go through the moment that the French and Indian War stops being this kind of cheeky diplomatic thing happening in the shadows. It's not declared. It's just kind of, hey, would you please leave? Or we're going to do flex. We're going to race to these spots on the map. We're going to go to the moment where it's all going to devolve and explode into the open and madness, right? Mm-hmm. So when you start this story, where do you start it?
I think probably one of the better places to start it, especially when we're doing like so Washington kind of centric, would be like Washington being sent by the colony of Virginia, specifically like more so by the Ohio Company of Virginia, where a lot of members of the Ohio Company of Virginia are also part of like the Virginia government. And so there's a little bit, we would probably look at that today.
Would the Hatch Act have a problem with this?
Yeah. Yes. Because it's like, oh, you're sending like effectively a military enterprise into the backcountry for all this, for a joint stock company.
Right.
And we're putting, funds from the colony of Virginia into supporting it. And so, yeah. And it's like, and everyone who is like very much for this obviously stands to make a lot of money if they are able to seize the Ohio territory. And so we would probably look at that today and be like, oh, there's a conflict of interest here. But also too, I think it's something that even still to this day, people inciting war in certain places to enrich themselves, enrich their friends is still something that happens to this day.
Happening right now. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, so I think a good place to start would probably be the fall of 1753.
Okay, so is the story you're going to lead into here sort of a good one? Because I guess maybe I should have asked, what is actually happening in North America, right? Because I know at work I can sum this up really quick, but for our listeners, like, what is happening between these empires and these, First Nations people that are here? Yeah,
so everything that's sort of like happening, especially like when we get to 1753, is you have France and especially, with New France wanting to sort of stretch their legs, stretch their territory, and really solidify their holding in North America. But you also have Great Britain, but specifically these like joint stock companies, like the Ohio Company of Virginia, sort of also kind of trying to do the same thing. So in just the few years previously, and then of course with that, then you have the Native Americans, which are then sort of stuck between these, the warring European cousins, the French and the English, and unfortunately being sort of bribed one way or the other to support either the French or the British.
Right.
But basically at this point, you've had the French have now like sort of set lead plates into the ground to sort of say like this is New France, this is France, and they're sort of using that as their claim. And of course, when you go all the way back to sort of some of the earliest claims of the colonies, like especially like Virginia, on paper has this massive claim. I'm going to butcher the direct quote. And I'm terrible with this. I sort of like butcher quotes, but I'll give you the gist. But
sure, I'm good with it.
But effectively, the original charter of the colony of Virginia says that it's going to go like as far north as the Hudson, as far west as the Isles of the Californias.
So literally the entire United States.
Yeah, effectively.
Like that will become the entire United States.
Right. And
the Isles of the California.
The Isles of the Californias.
Because remember, they don't know that California is all of what it is yet.
Yeah.
Is that like the
I mean, what
Google's on the internet?
Yeah.
No, I mean, they're still working off Drake's info, right? I mean,
yeah, got to be.
Right. And so it's like, so they're, and they're working off of like this, like, loose working knowledge of like sort of what's out there. And obviously too, we have to understand like the Spanish have already been out there, and the Spanish have already started to establish missions and like out on
and the
in
Russians.
California.
Don't leave the Russians out.
And then the Russians,
but we're going to leave them out.
We're going to leave them out. Yeah. Whatever.
So before we get into the this right here, what is the connection, or is there any, between some of the earlier kind of like King Philip's War, for example, or Metacom's War? What is are we still kind of picking up the pieces from that, or have we kind of moved on?
Yeah. So obviously to understand like anything that's about to start happening in the French and Indian War and the Greater 7 Years' War, as it's going on in Europe, is like you also have to like understand like the War of Austrian Succession.
Yeah.
And then also too, like a lot of the wars that you just named are, like largely start in Europe. There's these European wars that then bleed over to North America, and then like just because of the sheer fact that you have colonial holdings and things like that, like that's where you get that tension then between France, Great Britain, and their native allies. And so like that's nothing that's like new by the time of the French and Indian War. Like that's something that's been going on for at this point.
But we're gonna export war in reverse, right? Usually it starts in Europe and comes here, but we're gonna start it and send it out.
And that's kind of the thing that is different about the French and Indian War. And I don't want to give George Washington like too much credit, because there is already all these incredible tensions going on, but effectively
he didn't do anything to help it, right?
No. So there's already all these tensions, but basically, it's like, because of Washington, and we'll get to this and everything that happens at Fort Necessity, that's then when you see this escalation of tensions where you have an entire British army being sent over the year later in 1755 with Braddock's campaign. And then that's whenever it's like, really, it's this big, hot war between, France and Great Britain. And so like, it's sort of, this case, it's starting here in North America, and then
full send, express package for Europe, and the world,
right.
All right. So let's get into it then. So we've had the year 1753 come. Like Parker said, we've had all these various tensions that have exploded into these smaller pocket wars and things like that. Obviously, Europe sending a lot of that to the North Americas. Now, we're what was it, 52, 53? When is the agreement made that the English can go make the storehouse? Like when do we have actually, first let's finish the thought. So the French are trying to get their colonial holdings linked, right?
Yeah. So, cause at this point you have, basically it's like they kind of want control of like the Ohio, because then through the Ohio you get control of the Mississippi. Then you can sort of link like New France and like Louisiana,
right,
and everything along those lines. And so, so it's like, you're really trying to link those. And it's sort of the thought of the members of the Ohio Company of Virginia is like, oh, well, the French, they seem to be pretty interested in all this stuff out here, but we're also interested in all that stuff out there. So if we start to sort of put a footprint out there, we can sort of maybe get ahead of the French. But like at this point though, the French are like heavily investing in their holdings in like North America, and especially as it pertains to the Ohio Territory. And basically the Ohio Territory, for any viewers, listeners that like kind of want to know like what is that area, effectively the best way I can sum it up is it's sort of the area between the Ohio River as it comes down, and then the Mississippi. Like that's sort of that giant chunk of territory is sort of the best way that I can describe it. And so it's a very fertile, very rich area. And so like the French think it's so important that by the 1753, they've spent nearly 7 million livres to be able to bolster that up. So I mean, it's an incredible sum of money for the time period, and then just to send troops and materiel and everything else like into today, it's like we don't really think that much about it. It's like, oh yeah, hop on the interstate, you can move a bunch of stuff very quickly, but you have to think like with these roads that are incredibly unimproved, or
being built as they go.
In the case of the British, and then in the case of the French, having to move everything by river, and really, especially in North America, your rivers, your streams, and everything like that are going to be sort of your major arteries, your major ways of sort of getting around. So
what's at stake for the English then? If the French are able to successfully grab this area and link these colonies, utilize these waterways and essentially create a screen or a wall, what's at risk for the English in North America if that happens?
Money, baby. Money, land, everything else like that.
They're going to be bottled up on the coast. That's going to be the end of growing in North America, right?
Right. And so, and obviously, like what it comes to, I mean, even for the French, I mean, obviously the big thing, the big thing is money. I mean, and that's what it comes down to
it's always money.
Is extorting, you don't have the reason colonies exist is to extort, their goods and take them back to the mother country and everything like that. So
no, it's to spread democracy.
Right.
That's what we say.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what we say.
Yeah. And so like with that, it's like, everyone sort of sees this like rich, fertile land. And not only that, you have, people already going out to those areas to sort of scout them out. Like for instance, George Croghan, who is dealing with the fact that he's dealing with a bankruptcy in the colony of Pennsylvania that is, and he's sort of tied up in bankruptcy court, decides to sort of like kind of run. And so he sort of kind of becomes like someone who is starting to look into other means of making money and that sort of thing. So he kind of goes from Pennsylvania, goes to Virginia, and then he's sort of one of the first people that goes out and scouts the area and writes like all of these accounts of basically like what the country looks like. He's talking about there's these like huge stands of white oak. There's these very fertile lands. There's literally just coal just coming right out of the ground.
I literally wish I could see the original forests that were on this.
Oh, yeah.
Like, my God.
That would be so
yeah,
amazing.
no, the old growth forest. And then the other thing that's cool too is he goes to a salt lick, and it's a salt lick that has been used, and has been, I guess, used for, at this point, thousands of years, because he actually sends like a 4-pound mammoth tooth back to Virginia.
Just like laying out there?
Yeah, like
That's
to basically
crazy.
be like, yeah, and look, like here's like some of like the wild resources that are out here. Here's a mammoth's tooth. Like, oh look, I'm sending you things.
I'm immediately thinking of that meme, and it's like the first person to discover dinosaur bones. Like
Right.
they're like, what the
Right. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's like, it's very much, they're like, okay, like, yeah, we want a piece of that. And the other thing too, is like, land speculation is really becoming the big thing for, the British oriented America at this time. And so like, that's really where a lot of this is stemming from, is like, and we want that land.
Yeah.
We want that money.
that money.
And it seems like since Europeans have arrived here kind of en masse, it seems like the French have just generally done a better job of getting along with them than the British, like pretty much ever since the beginning.
Yeah.
Like
they did a better job. Yeah.
they did it. I'm not saying that they were perfect.
Well,
what I'm saying is they did a slightly better job.
they were more proactive.
Because I think the other thing too is sort of with like when you talk about like especially like France, and like the settling of New France by the Europeans and everything like that. When like with France, you have like a singular like religion through Catholicism,
right?
And so with that, you have the mission system,
okay,
and you have Jesuits, which are coming out. They're converting.
Oh yeah, that's right.
A lot of the Native Americans that are up more in those regions to Catholicism, and then through the conversion, it's like, well, now we basically worship the same God, practice the same religion, and so through that, you're I guess more easily able to keep your thumb on a population. And the other part of it too is you have especially like in the British colonies, there is a little bit more diversity. There's obviously Protestantism is being practiced throughout the colonies, but there's different varieties and different sects of Protestantism that are being practiced. And so it's not like this like singular thing, like in New France, where it's like you're,
that's a really good point.
Right.
That's a really good
and
point.
you're sending out like these missions and things like that. And so like through that, it's a little bit of a different priority, I would say as well.
That's cool. I'm glad I asked, because I was wondering, I was like, what was the magic bullet that did it, right?
Yeah.
Because it just, I mean,
Well,
again,
it was the half king, but we'll get there.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
But like, well, I've always kind of, I mean, I grew up obviously, in Maine and all this stuff. And King Philip's War is obviously not on the mind of every Mainer.
Right.
But if you're into history, like I
Right,
was,
right.
a doofus who was into history as a kid,
You are a doofus.
you run into King Philip's War. You run into it everywhere. I grew up near a place called Castine.
Yeah.
Medaka Wando, you hear about him, you hear about Metacom and all these people. Who was King Philip? But I've always wondered, like, you hear these kind of success stories from places like Castine, where the French and the native got along very well, and the British kind of show up and they just kind of, nope, not today.
Yeah.
So
it's a very British thing to do.
it is.
Well,
It is kind of.
And I think too, like, and I don't want to like boil it down to this, but there's also the whole thing too of like, well, when you look at the population of New France and Europeans coming over and settling New France and like the Acadians and everything like that are living in New France, compared to the population of the coasts with the British colonies, it's like I forget right off the top of my head like exactly what that figure is, but it can probably be rounded up to like 20,000 or living in like sort of New France compared to like 2 million.
But it's obscene. I mean, it's literally obscene, the numbers disparity in North America.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so like that's also kind of a thing too, because it's like I think the writing is kind of on the wall of like, okay, like the coasts are really getting populated by all of because you have to think too, it's like a lot of the immigration to the British colonies as well. Like it's not just people coming from the British Isles. Like there's a lot of people that are coming from mainland Europe and everything along those lines. I
think a lot of people forget too. From my region, I think a lot of people forget that we weren't always New England.
Right.
I'm really glad that you're using the term New France, because let's get that back in circulation. Like,
no, it's Canada now, buddy. Sorry.
Well, no, but I mean, like,
hate to break that to you. If you saw how that went recently when we talked about Canada, they are Canada. Real proud of it.
But
pissing
I'm
off
talking
a lot of Quebecois right now. Like, they're like, I'm not listening to this.
No,
anymore.
but I'm talking. No, you're right. But I'm talking about like during the early colonization days.
Sure.
I mean, there was even a time briefly when it was referred to as New Ireland. Like it knew that region, the provinces, and what would become Maine and some of.
We don't want New Ireland. We just want all of the Ireland we have.
Ireland.
Give us the 6 counties. God damn it! Anyway, all right. So before we jump back into 1753 and we move this story forward, is New France as built up as a lot of the cities on the coast have become by the 1750s? I know we've all been in North America roughly around the same amount of time at this point, a little over 100, 120 years somewhere in there.
Unless you're the Vikings and you've been
Philadelphia's becoming a very large city, right? Like New York's becoming a larger city, right? Annapolis is a bigger city for us. Where do we have like comparable large cities?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Like Montreal, Quebec.
I asked because the French seem to be spread out in North America a lot more. Like they're occupying a lot more real estate. Whether it's tenuous or not, they're just in more places on the map, it seems.
At the end of the day, one of the biggest reasons too that the French are over here is for, North American trade goods and everything like that. Obviously you need centers, places to then ship all those goods back to the mother country. So the larger port cities are going to be pretty substantial. And, even when to this day, when you think of like Quebec and like the old city of Quebec and everything like that, it's a really well established European style.
Are the bigger French holdings in New France or are they in Louisiana?
So the bigger holdings are going to be like largely in New France. And then, when you think of like down in Louisiana, it's like obviously, like, it's
Like New Orleans, is that a big hub at this point?
Yeah, it's like a substantial like port city, but I would say
wow. At this time, at this early,
yeah,
wow, that's great.
And
okay.
so, and then it's like, but then like when you like, obviously when you look at New France though, it's like that's where a lot more of like the money is coming from.
Sure.
That's where a lot more is coming out of the country to then go back to,
All right, well, let's jump back into the race for the interior then.
Yeah.
So we have the British trying to not get shut up on the coast, trying to push west, trying to get into the Ohio, into the Ohio area so they can get the resources. The French are trying to run north and south, get into that same region, claim all that land, link their colonies.
Right.
1753, we collide for the first time. Now, I don't think bullets go flying, but they do come in contact.
Yeah. So, 1753 is when, the Ohio Company of Virginia, and then sort of, with the backing of, the Virginia government through Robert Dinwiddie, who's the governor at the time. Governor Dinwiddie is also a member of the Ohio Company of Virginia. So again, he stands to, make some money.
Look, man, you can do these things, right? It's totally legal.
Yeah. And so...
It's completely unbiased.
Is it jokes aside, is it legal? It's definitely legal at this time.
Yeah,
there's no conflict.
Yeah.
There's no modern lens on that. That is straight legal in the moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so basically, like, with all of that, they are like, well, let's we kind of have this understanding that the French are sort of encroaching down into the area. We know about them sort of sinking their lead plates. We know about the forts that they're building along the Belle Riviere, the Ohio River. So let's send, with the permission of like the Board of Trade and everything like that, let's send sort of an emissary, as it were, to the nearest French fortification, Fort Le Boeuf, to basically say like, hey, I just want to remind you that this is British territory, and you
got to leave.
Yeah, and you're starting to encroach in it, like His Most Britannic Majesty's lands. Like,
you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
And so they, basically charge one of the members of the company, a young, at this time 21-year-old George Washington, to deliver that letter to the commandant of that fort.
No pressure, right? No pressure, George. Can I ask you two quick questions? Do you remember who you were when you were 21?
Right.
Like, could you?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
What were you doing when you were 21, Jacob?
When I was 21, I was still in college. And
okay.
I was just
were you a collegiate partier, or were you a good boy?
I was pretty boring.
You're a good boy.
Tame,
okay.
Yeah,
what were you doing at 21, partner?
Working my butt off in a retail store, meeting my future wife.
All right. Well, I'm on brand. I was in a heavy metal band, and I was going to be the next Dimebag Darrell, and I was banging the hair I had. I was going, wow, man. Yeah. Whoa! Definitely not capable of handling the pressure of this diplomatic mission.
I certainly wasn't looking ahead to like 30 years in the future, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
I wasn't looking ahead to that.
I mean, he's not either, but I always find this moment incredible, just because at a certain point, especially in this episode and network, we do this, we'll end up making fun of George for essentially starting this whole thing. But you do got to put it in context.
Should we issue an apology for making fun of George
No, but it's
right
just
now?
This is one of those humble moments where we'll do it, where it's like, yeah, we're gonna make fun of him. But do you remember who you were when you were 21?
Right.
Yeah, could you handle yourself? Me, absolutely not.
And for Washington as well, like, this is a time in his life where he is trying to define who he is in terms of like where he fits in this like society in Virginia and in the British Empire. His older brother had served in the British military,
Lawrence,
and his father as well was like a pretty big name, like up in the upper neck of Virginia in that area. And so he's recently inherited this massive plantation. He a few years earlier had gone and is making friends with other big names in the area, like the Fairfaxes. And
Sally.
and for Thomas Fairfax, he had gone out and surveyed Fairfax's lands out in the Shenandoah Valley, and so he's kind of like already been out in this area. He's also been given a couple titles recently, in terms of like local government in Virginia.
Okay.
And so he kind of seems like, okay, like this is sort of the right guy for the job. He's
a rising star.
He's this kid who wants to build his name a little bit more and that kind of thing. And so let's give this kid this job of, going up with Christopher Gist, who is also a sort of a frontier explorer in that area and is also going to be the interpreter for George Washington. Let's give him the summons to sort of head up that way towards, up north basically of modern day Pittsburgh today.
And this is where we're going to ask the French politely to leave.
Yeah, ask the French politely to leave. So, he goes up there. They do try to get some Native American allies to come with them. To basically, as a little bit of a show of force against the French, to basically say like, well, look, like,
is it just the two of them? Like, is it just
largely,
Christopher and George?
Christopher Gist and George Washington.
Yeah, they're not going to be intimidating. It's just the two of them.
Right. And so, and of course, Washington is very eager to do this. He doesn't have any formal education. He's raised himself on like these old wartime stories, and he very much is sort of looking for an opportunity to kind of have his own adventure in a way. Yeah. And so he's very eager to be put on this task. And of course, too, I think probably someone like sat him down there like, there's lots of money to be made in speculation.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I like money. And so, so like, all right, so go up there and deliver this thing. And so, so they go on this adventure, is the best way to kind of call it, this adventure with George Washington and Christopher Gist, up to, they end up getting to Fort LaBeouf, where they kind of start noticing some stuff right away. Washington actually takes detailed notes of like the fortification and everything, but they also notice a lot of canoes that are like ready to go. And so like it becomes pretty apparent, like, oh, like, all these canoes, they've got to go somewhere.
The French are moving.
The French are going to be moving. And not only that, like at this point, like it's pretty well known that they've been building this like string of forts down the Belle Riviere. And so Fort LaBeouf just being like the last one at that time. And so Washington goes in and Les Gardenots, sorry, my French is terrible, is the sort of the French commandant, and he's a veteran at this point. Like he's been in like the French military for decades.
Oh, wow.
He's like served like up in, he's like, here's just a smattering of the places where he served. He served in like what is today modern day Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
At a fortification there. He served what is it, modern day Winnipeg. He served at like all of these like different. He's like this seasoned.
I've been over the map.
Right.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden, here's like, I'm 21 and I'm a ginger, and here's a letter from Governor Dinwiddie.
It's like me trying to deal with somebody at work last year. Like,
right.
like shut up.
Right. It's just like here you go, and like Governor Dinwiddie like spells it out like pretty clearly. Like, you're encroaching on these lands. You're encroaching on what is part of the claim of the colony of Virginia. I serve my master, the King of England, and you're directly flying in his face by, obviously I'm, and then he's, no, but yeah, so he's basically like, saying like, all right, it's time to go. And so you can understand that for the French, like, while it is kind of funny and amusing to them, like, oh, okay, here's this kid, like,
oh, it's so cute,
giving us this, like, it's also concerning because it's like, okay, well,
they did this though, like they felt confident enough to do this,
right?
Which means they'll be back,
right? And so it kind of becomes a little bit of like this race for the prize, because also on that mission, George Washington gets to lay eyes on the forks of the Ohio, basically the modern day point in Pittsburgh.
He sees what's up, like, oh, yes, this is the real estate.
And he specifically says like this would be a good location for a fortification. And so
do the French.
and the French of course know that too. Like the French have been scouting out the area. They've been sending people ahead. They are very well aware of the area, and that is their goal as well, is to establish themselves on the forks of the Ohio. So that's where that kind of leads us then into 1754, and
so the French said no.
Right. The French were basically like, ha ha ha, like you can take this back to your governor, and we don't have any.
Host? Is this where he hosts Washington? Like they sit down?
Well,
like, they have like a sit down.
They like, and he like serves him dinner.
That's what I mean. But there's like there's like a whole formality to it, and then it's basically no.
Yeah.
Oh wow, I hadn't heard that. That's cool.
I mean, but that's part of like the custom of the time. Is like you're basically hosting. It's formal, but I just was like, is this the image I'm thinking of where like Washington is sitting there and being wined and dined, and then just flatly told no.
Right.
Thanks for dinner.
Right. Exactly.
But he's like,
when you guys going to leave?
Like bluntly told no. It's like, no, we're not doing that.
Right.
Okay.
And so when he gets back to Williamsburg in Virginia, Dinwiddie, like obviously, like is I'm sure frustrated by the fact that the French were like, and not only that, like I'm sure had to expect, like I'm going to send like this letter with like and so. I don't want to start making assumptions.
It is weird if he did expect that to work.
Right.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie.
But
I'm going to send this little kid over to the French.
And a letter, and the French will do it.
Right.
Yeah.
But very quickly starts to like get things moving for a campaign. So even before he goes to, even before Governor Dinwiddie goes to the Virginia House of Burgesses to sort of ask for money for a military campaign and everything like that, basically they already go ahead and they get a company together of 40, 50 soldiers. That also includes carpenters that are going to be led by a man by the name of William Trent, whose father, founds Trenton, New Jersey, which would then, of course, be famous like 20 years later. But
hell of a battle there.
There you
absolutely
go.
Hell of a battle.
Yeah, that includes George Washington.
That's
But
true.
but so and the two I think big names to take with like sort of this first little expedition would be William Trent and Captain William Trent and Ensign Ward are going to be the two names that sort of come off with that one. And so basically what happens is they're like, okay, it's obvious that the French are going to be moving down to the forks of the Ohio and they're going to start, building their fortifications and all that sort of thing. So let's get up there first. Mm-hmm. And the intention was, because it was already sort of a plan of like, okay, spring of 1754, we're going to send people to go fortify the forks of the Ohio. Like that's going to be the intention. But what ends up happening is that they sort of, they push it a little bit. And at the same time as well, Governor Dinwiddie sort of insists to Washington, like, hey, why don't you take your travel journal from that expedition in 1753? Want you to sort of edit it and everything. We're going to publish that in a pamphlet. So that way, we can start to, get this sort of out there.
Becomes a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, it becomes a New York Times bestseller.
That paper, that's a really old paper.
And the other thing too is Dinwiddie is sort of emboldened as well because he's already received word also in 1753 from the Board of Trade of like, oh, by the way, we're going to send, we're sending a bunch of cannon over. We're sending sort of, additional supplies so that you can effectively get something rolling here.
Nice.
And so that's already pretty well known. So I Dinwiddie sort of probably feels emboldened by that to be like, all right, let's get things rolling.
Do you think that Dinwiddie ever got made fun of for his name? As in Dimwitty?
People hated Dinwiddie.
Oh, okay, so
I'm sure that was a. I mean, do you have? So to answer his question, do you have any like examples of that exact diss? But I'm sure that diss came out somewhere.
1750s Parker would be making fun of his name.
Yeah.
I'm just putting that out there
until he found out.
Right.
That's
I'm sure.
fine.
Who knows? Maybe if we
worth dying for. I stand by that pun, sir.
It could be like a thing though that if you like looked, I'm sure probably Franklin would be the one to be like, Dinwiddie,
good old Dimwitty,
dim-witted, more like it.
Everybody laughs because Franklin's hilarious.
You're a genius.
And then he's like, "Shut up,
don't go into my
basement. Go hold this kite in the storm.
Go outside.
He's like,
this kite.
You don't laugh. You go outside.
Go outside.
Hang this key, you jig."
Ben Franklin's like, I'm going to play with electricity. No one go in my basement. No one go in my basement. No one goes in my basement.
Jesus Christ.
I'm very jovial.
So Dinwiddie sees that the momentum is being built before he's even gotten it going. So he's just trying to seize on what's already kind of in motion, right?
Yeah.
So build upon it, I guess you could say. Is the House of Burgess a hard sell?
No. So they approve the funding.
They're like, sure, whatever, Governor.
Campaign. And so here's an order.
Is Virginia like one of the really wealthy colonies?
Yeah,
it's like one of the dumb wealthy ones at this point.
Yeah, Virginia is like
the colony.
Is like the kind of like crown of the colonies. Like it's like it is like the cash cow.
So what point does Massachusetts try to wear that hat for itself? Is it really just 20 years later when they're like, we are important, we start the whole war?
Well, that's
Shut
just
up,
an
everybody.
attitude problem that Massachusetts has in general.
That's true.
Right.
But I was just trying to wonder because, one of the conversations we have is how cheap our colony is, how tight they are with the purse, things like that.
Right.
It just seems like Virginia's like full send, go get it, go claim it, raise the money, raise the men.
So immediately they put 10,000 pounds sterling towards, when you think of that, like they put 10,000 pounds sterling towards the Fort Necessity campaign.
That's like funding our fort.
And that's like funding
literally our job.
Frederick, yeah. And so here, I just want to read this. So this is verbatim, the orders that Washington has in January of 1754. So Mr. Washington had my orders to make what observations he could on his journey and to take a plan of their fort. He assures me that they have begun another fort at the mouth of the creek, which he thinks will be finished by the month of March. There were in the fort where the commander resided about 300 regular forces, 900 more were gone to winter quarters. So this is him talking about sort of the French. So there's already 300 there, and then he knows that there's like another 900 that like, so it's like, this is a large,
that's a huge force,
French force. In order to save their provisions is why they sent the other 900 into quarters. And those are forts that are on like Lake Erie, is what Dinwiddie says. They were to return in the month of March. Then they fully determined with all forces they could collect, which George Washington understood, would be 1,500 regulars besides Indians to go down the river Ohio with the purpose of building many other forts. And their chief residence would be at Logstown, and that they had near 300 canoes to transport their soldiers, provisions, and ammunition, etc. So basically, because of all that, like he uses that, Dinwiddie uses that as sort of his pretext to then basically get emergency measures passed. And so,
yeah, well, I mean, it's like it's happening right now.
Yeah,
like if you don't act, we missed.
Right, and so with that, Washington's then given orders to go recruit 100 men from Frederick and Augusta counties.
That is Frederick County, Virginia, right? Or is that Frederick?
No, that's Frederick County, Virginia.
Okay.
And so basically Washington's sort of given the task of sort of pulling those guys out of the county militias is sort of the way to think about it. And then, but already too, and at this time as well, so he gives that order to go ahead and recruit those guys. They're going to be placed under George Washington's command, proceed immediately to the frontier. In addition, Captain William Trent was to be ordered to raise what traders and other men he can to annoy the enemy. And then, the idea then was that Trent's company was supposed to recruit like basically another 100 men is sort of the way to think about it. And then the other thing that he does as well is he appoints John Carlisle. His house is still in Alexandria, Virginia today.
Yep. To
be commissary of provisions and stores with his headquarters in Alexandria. And then so, that's basically like that's sort of everything that gets rolling. And then that's whenever he gets specifically gives his orders to George Washington to like start earnestly getting this ball rolling, getting people recruited, all that kind of thing.
All right.
But William Trent goes ahead. He heads out towards the Ohio territory, Ohio area. And then, they get to work building, what is called, basically is given the name, over time, like Trent's Fort, to start building the fort on the point in Pittsburgh, modern day Pittsburgh, is sort of the best way to think about it. So to start building the fort there. Things aren't going well, as you can imagine, with like 50 dudes just kind of sent into the wilderness.
Yeah.
There are Native Americans that are helping Trent at this time and Trent's company, and that's Tenagrishan, the Half King, which we really haven't talked that much about. But basically, the Half King, he's given this kind of name because like he really has like no power. He's like half a king is kind of like where that nickname, the Half King, comes from. And the Half King essentially is trying to create more of a name for himself and to be more influential with.
So what's his real name?
Tenagrishan. Yeah. And so he's trying to become like a more influential figure and all that kind of things. And so for him, like to try and gain influence, especially over all the Native Americans that are living in the Ohio territory, he is really sort of interested in helping the British to establish themselves, because by helping the British establish themselves, that probably means like more favorable conditions than for, the Half King, his people, and then all the other Native tribes that are living in sort of in the Ohio territory.
Quick question before I forget it, and it's a slight potential derail and or rabbit hole. William Trent, the Trent affair of the American Civil War with the RMS Trent, is that named for him? I just didn't know if that was like, you might know that.
Hey, that's not the question for me. That's,
I'm going to look into that then.
You should look into
that.
Who
it's probably for? It's probably for a mutual friend of ours.
Yeah.
It's about a British ship.
There you go.
Definitely a Kyle Dalton question.
Yeah, that is a Kyle Dalton question. Tune in. That'll be the next.
Dude, he hit me up recently. It was like, all right, what we're going to do. Like, he's like telling me what we're going to do. And I loved his idea. He's like, we're going to put out a poll on what. Basically, I'm going to put out topics, and your listeners are going to vote on what my next visit's like. I'm like, I like that. So you're going to vote on Kyle Dalton's next episode soon. So anyway, all right. So getting back into it then. So so Ten Grishin's kind of.
So he has his people, and Ten Grishin, like, to basically show his support to the British, but also like show like how much this means to him, and like he also wants to take ownership, kind of like over the fort as well. Helps lay some of the first logs for. Trent's fort.
Oh, so he does like the golden shovel stuff.
Yeah, it's sort of the best way to think about it. And so, lays some of the first logs for that. And then, but on the other side of it, it's like, sure, like all these, these Virginians are like building this thing. They're also very quickly running out of food. So they're running low on supplies. They're basically at this point eating like Indian corn and flour. And the other thing too is they keep saying to the natives that are with them, like, hey, we'll literally, like Trent is saying, like, we'll literally pay you. We'll give you money to just like, we'll give you money to go out and just bring us back a turkey. Like,
go hunt something.
Right. We'll pay you for a turkey. We'll pay you like to bring back any food, like any meat for, sustaining this operation. And they're like, no, wow. I don't think so. And so because of that, William Trent has to leave. He's like, all right, well, I need to go back. At least I need to go back to Wills Creek, modern day Cumberland, to get supplies and everything like that. And so he heads back east over, the Allegheny Mountains. And before he leaves Ensign Ward in charge of operations, and basically makes him like kind of the commander of the fort. He's like, yep, just keep making this thing. And
how many guys out of like 50 does he leave them?
He leaves him basically, like 40 guys. So it's Ensign Ward, and
so he just takes a small detachment back to Wills Creek.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Ensign Ward is sort of left in charge of this fort. And so it's around that time in spring of 1754 where a flotilla is sort of the best way to describe it, of canoes and everything else, come down the Ohio River.
All these canoes that we were talking about earlier?
Right.
Okay.
That actually had to be quite a sight, right?
Yeah, like it probably would have been an incredible sight.
And everybody's wearing their brown pants, hopefully, that day.
Right. And so, right. And,
wow.
And so they come down the Ohio River, and, they basically land their canoes right on the shores there at the point in Pittsburgh, and they march their soldiers within musket shot of the fort, and they also have 18 pieces of artillery. Which they're like have trained at.
I was literally about to ask, why didn't the English open fire? But then you said that, and I was like, well, that makes sense, because they don't have enough to handle that.
Right. And it's a bunch of ragtag Virginians and some tradespeople, like carpenters and that kind of thing. And it's literally like, as they're like, it's like, like a day or two, or maybe even, day of like they're hanging the gates for the fort. And then all of a sudden.
They must have been freaking out when they saw that coming to them.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, to Ensign Ward's credit, like Ensign Ward is basically like, no, I'm not going to surrender this fort.
Hell yeah.
But they're basically like, all right, well, you can either surrender and we'll let you leave with all of your equipment and everything like that. Or we're going to blow you.
Die.
Yeah. We're going to blow you into matchsticks. Like,
right.
That's the option. And Ensign Ward is like, I don't want to risk the lives of these men and everything like that, and so he pulls out of there.
How long is that deliberation?
Probably not very long. It's because then it's like by like noon the next day, like all the soldiers are leaving, everything like that. So while all of this is going on, Washington is attempting poorly to recruit soldiers for the Virginia Regiment, and it's not going very well.
He's not a popular guy at the moment.
Well, because he's basically like, again, at this point now he's 22 because his birthday's in February. So he's 22. He's still trying to recruit. And
how many was he trying to recruit? Wasn't there like a number he needed to recruit?
Yeah. So basically, he needed to recruit because they send out all these different, because they've made all these officers and everything like that. They're all these guys who have joined, And so like really he just needs to recruit, like 50 men.
Okay, 50. Okay.
50 to 100 men is sort of like what Washington is given to recruit. And so the order for that is Major George Washington. You are forthwith to repair to the county of Frederick. There you are to take under your command 50 men of the militia. They will be delivered to you by the commander of the county pursuant to my orders. You are to send your lieutenant at the same time to the county of Augusta to receive 50 men, so 100 altogether, from the commander of that county. As I have ordered, and with them he is to join you at Alexandria, to which place you are to proceed. As soon as you receive the men in Frederick, so Frederick County, and having received this detachment, you are to train and discipline them in the best manner you can. And for all necessaries, you are to apply yourself to Mr. John Carlisle of Alexandria, who has my orders to supply you, having all things in readiness. You are to use all expedition in proceeding to the forks of the Ohio with your men under your command. And there you are to finish and complete in the best manner, and as soon as you possibly can, the fort which I expect is there already begun by the Ohio Company. So you are to act on here's some, because this is going to play later. So take special sort of account of this.
Okay.
So that's sort of like, oh, Washington, do all this, recruit all these people. Here's really like the marching orders, like the orders. You are to act on the defensive, but in case any attempts are made to obstruct the works or interrupt our settlements by any persons whatsoever, you are to restrain all such offenders, and in case of resistance, to make prisoners of or kill and destroy them. For the rest of you are to conduct yourselves as the circumstances of the service shall require, and act as you shall find best, the furtherance of His Majesty's service, and the good of His dominion. Wishing you health and success. I bid you farewell.
Wishing you health and success.
Yeah.
All the best. Cheerio.
Yep.
Can I start signing my emails that?
Right.
Yeah, dude.
Wishing you health and success.
Wishing you health and success. I bid you farewell.
Everybody, if I did that, everybody would know how disingenuous that was.
Right.
I want to do that a couple times at work and just see what happens.
That's a weird way to say get
Right. Yeah. Wishing you health and success. I bid you farewell.
Yes.
So with that, like Washington, basically like starts in earnest, like trying to recruit men and everything along those lines. He's having a tough time at it, like recruiting men. He does call out these militias, but they're of course like, no, like,
yeah,
I don't want to do that. And so the other thing too is like, you have to consider like what's on the line. Like, we're not at war. I mean, that's the big thing. Is like, we're not at war.
Sure.
So why are we recruiting a military if we're not at war?
Right.
And so basically, what does the Ohio Company of Virginia have a lot of, or hopes to have a lot of? Money, but also money through land
acquisition.
Yes.
That's right.
And so basically the main thing is like, well, we can offer, all of this land. And when you're talking about like the way to basically like hold any sort of legal power and that kind of thing, like in the colony of Virginia, is through owning a certain amount of land to be able to vote and everything else in the Virginia House of Burgesses. I mean, that's a pretty big incentive to try and get some people to, want to join this weird operation that's like kind of coming out of nowhere.
Right.
And
one thing I just want to call out really quickly, just because of, some of our viewers and listeners might be used to more of the Civil War numbers. 50 men, a company of 50 men.
Right.
I think the biggest number we've talked about so far is like 1,500. That is a huge amount of people.
Oh, this is a dramatic. For this era,
this is a big era.
Yeah.
For this era, you're talking about 1,000 guys and some. I mean, wow.
Right.
I mean, that's more people than you
What do we
probably
say?
you might see in your entire life.
We're not here for this today, but what do we say? The Braddock expedition, largest army ever assembled in North America at that point. What is it, like 2,500 guys total?
Right.
Yeah.
But it's. I mean, I brief aside.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to call that out because some people might be like, 50 guys. What are 50 guys going to do? A lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, 50 guys are really going to do some damage out there.
Well, especially when you consider like, obviously to move all those troops and everything like during the American Civil War, You have railroads.
Yes.
You have one of the
Paddle
largest
ships, paddle steamers.
ships.
Yep.
Yeah, you have like the largest amounts of horse in the world is in America at that time to be able to like move all that men and material.
Right.
When literally with this expedition for both the French and the British interests in Virginia, like they are using like trails that are semi-established, like used as hunting trails by Native Americans and things of that nature, but largely like blazing these trails through an untamed wilderness that is like the just massive old growth trees.
Right.
And they have to take and build roads over like these incredible heights as well. Like when we're talking like elevations and we're talking some of the ways that they have to go, up these like sides of these mountains and things like that. And then also like river crossings and everything else. Like, I mean, it's substantial. And
the logistics of this is just nutty.
And that's the thing to really consider is the logistics. Like even like it's insane to me. But obviously like it's someone who just like who studies the 18th century, but like when you consider like the logistics of getting things, material sent from France into New France and then taken by boat, taken by several river portages and everything else to then make it all the way down to what is today modern day Pittsburgh. Like that is, that's nuts.
Well, what I think about
all by hand.
What I think about is like,
and floating.
And all three of us have experience with this, right? As like reenactors, as living history, black powder demonstrators, think about how much care goes into just removing a 6-pound naval gun from a small trailer onto 2 pieces of wood to fire in a safe environment. How much like don't crush your toes, like all this crazy stuff. These guys are like going over mountains, like literally transporting this across the ocean.
Right.
Like I know this isn't the episode, but like when Knox, is moving the guns out of what is it, Ticonderoga?
Fort Ticonderoga,
like literally
75.
just like they're on these like boat things and stuff like
and
that.
Sleds and everything. Yeah.
So the logistics of this is all insane. So it's never lost on me that just moving on this chessboard is a huge deal in and of itself.
Right.
So in 54, they're trying to get stuff going and people are, I guess, weirded out by it, right? Like,
yeah.
Okay. So.
And the other thing too is like kind of in that time as well, like while Washington's being given these orders and everything like that, he also like writes a letter where he basically says like, I'm too youthful and inexperienced to be the colonel of this expedition. But if you made me lieutenant colonel, like that would be nice. Is basically like what he says. And that I want to kind of point out too, is like, so we're kind of starting to see the makeup of like the officers corps of the Virginia regiment. Obviously like Washington's kind of like the cheerleader of the Virginia regiment. Like he really wants to get this thing going. But he's named lieutenant colonel, and then the colonel of the Virginia regiment would be named a man by the name of Joseph Fry.
Okay.
So Fry is a
Washington had been a major up to this point, right?
Yeah, and it was just like kind of like a local militia. So that's what you think about it. But and so Fry at this point is he's a teacher of mathematics at William and Mary, and he had done some like made some maps and things like that in the past, and that's probably really like he's an educated man, so sort of like of that like sort of that gentleman's class, but educated. He knows how to make make maps and everything along those lines. So that's likely what like sort of they're probably looking at, like just to be like sort of the sage wisdom of the group to sort of keep the young hotshot Washingtons maybe like a little bit sort of the reins on him,
Sure,
but then also to likely like make maps and reconnoiter sort of the area and that kind of thing. So on the 9th of March, Washington writes a letter, and I love this letter, writes a letter to Dinwiddie, which is one of the first things that really starts to describe to us the makeup of some of these recruits that are being recruited for the Virginia regiment. So he says, these guys are apprehensive to join the Virginia regiment without knowing who's paying them. So like, that's kind of the first thing.
Yeah.
He goes on to say, that the men are sort of constantly teasing him. Like these recruits are teasing a young Washington, like as to like when they're going to get their pay, when they're going to get clothing. We were told that when we joined the Virginia regiment, we'd be given, clothing and everything like that. So it's kind of like at this time where Washington is saying, like, I think it would be a good idea, like writing to Dinwiddie, like, I think it would be a good idea that we clothe them in, maybe put them in a uniform, make them like have a soldier's appearance and all that kind of thing. Washington, though, goes on to call them, he calls them loose, idle persons. So basically, like, these are a bunch of like people who are idle. They're probably like, you know, like itinerant working laborers, yeah, basically. Loose, idle persons. He says that they have scarce a coat or waistcoat to their back. He even says like many of them are shoeless.
That's why they're asking for the,
right.
for the coats.
Right. And obviously, like, Washington might be like kind of stretching the truth a little bit. Like, you know, I doubt like these guys are going to be completely naked. But I mean, basically, like, he's just like, yeah, calling them loose, idle persons.
They look terrible.
Yeah, they're naked. They're teasing him.
What a motley crew.
Right. This is very much a motley crew of folks. You know,
I just get this image because in my mind I've always put this age of George with my nose in the air. You know, I'm young, I'm good looking, I'm ambitious. I've been validated in some ways. I've been granted power in a lot of other ways. Yeah. And here it is, just like this. The me of the world, the middle-aged guy that's just like unimpressed.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what am I getting paid? Just like grilling him as he walks by.
Because knowing too, like, there's nothing that specifically says exactly like what Washington is wearing, but because Washington has this like idealized version of like what an officer should be, I guarantee you, he's a man, he's a young man with money. Yeah. So I guarantee you he's probably wearing very nice clothing. He's very much like has the trappings of an officer from the time period and everything like that.
There's some dude with torn slops who does not care.
Right.
Well, I mean, later on, right? I mean, like later on when he's older, he shows up at the Constitutional Convention wearing his
wearing like a uniform and so it's
like, oh, look at me. I should say like before the Constitutional Convention, I guess. But anyway, he's like, yeah, look at me. I might have been in the military once. Maybe you should, look at me.
But just very much probably like the clothes make the man. Sort of how he carries himself and everything like that. And the other thing too is like imagine like if you've ever been sort of where you've been promoted into a position where you don't know everything yet, and people are coming to you and asking, like,
I do that for a living every day of my life, friend.
Right,
you should know.
Right. And people are coming to you and they're asking, like, well, when are we getting this? When is this happening? And you're just kind of like, well, soon, very soon. And then like you're writing your superiors at the same time, like, hey, like I don't even know what to tell these people.
I'm literally going through that right now.
Perhaps we should get their coats. That's a great idea, Private.
Right. Like they're coming in like,
Mr. Davis recommends coats. That's a great recommendation. Right. Promote him.
Right. And so so just think about it that like, again, he's a kid and he's just kind of like, all these people are coming to him now, like asking like, but now he is responsible for like trying to feed these people, train these people in military discipline.
That goes back to the caveat earlier, right? We'll make fun of him for being a lot of things, but like, could you handle that at that age?
Right.
I couldn't.
Right. And so at the same time too, Governor Dinwiddie he sent out a lot like letters to the governors of the various colonies, basically saying like, hey, things are heating up over here, and it would be great if you could send your assistance. And so, like, there's really not much that's done specifically by the colonies, but because this is technically a British military venture, like it's been, granted to be done by like the Board of Trade and everything along those lines, and sort of orders have been sent over to America, and there's also like the cannon that are being sent to Williamsburg and everything like that. So that like basically the independent British companies that are in America at that time send assistance. So at that same time, like while all this is going on, while Washington's kind of training his men and everything like that, the word does get to the independent companies of New York. So there's two companies from New York, and then the independent company of South Carolina. So these are regular British troops that are that they're company size. So their highest ranking officer would be a captain, and so these guys are being sent to basically help bolster this operation.
So like full companies, right? Like 100 guys each?
100 guys, and including like officer staff and everything like that. But yeah, so they are being sent both from New York and from South Carolina. And the guys that are coming from South Carolina, like they do have some military experience, but it's like a lot of guys that have like been in the independent company like since like the 1740s. So it's like at this point they've like been in America for like all this time. They've, and so it's these are older guys.
Yeah.
A year later, when General Braddock comes and General Braddock is reviewing the independent companies, he says like basically like these guys belong in the Chelsea hospital. Like it's time for them to retire. It's time for them to
hang them up, boys.
All right. So that kind of goes to show you like kind of the makeup of this independent company. They're seasoned soldiers.
That's how I feel.
Right. But he's like, okay, it's
Are you
their
a seasoned soldier?
No, but time to hang them up.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, basically it's their time to hang it up and get out of the service. So that's like 1 year later. So Washington basically says that because he sends that first letter where he says that they're naked and everything like that. That's on March 9th. He sends another letter to Dinwiddie by March 20th. So we've had 11 days of kind of
they're super naked.
Yeah, but he states that that a total now of 75 men have gathered in Alexandria, 50 of which he recruited. So he makes sure to say like, I recruited.
I'm doing my job.
I did my job.
Okay.
But Washington complains about managing them. He calls them self-willed and ungovernable. So
they're Americans,
right? And so
he's got some staff problems, man.
Right.
Yeah.
But he's getting an HR department in there.
But like, so even with all of that though, them being self-willed and ungovernable, we are getting to the point like March where Dinwiddie had assumed that things would have gotten underway and things would have been rolling. So kind of with that, like with Washington, with his first 75 men, Dinwiddie kind of gives him orders like, okay, go ahead, march, start marching forward. The rest of the group, because at that point they wanted it to be basically like a total of 300. They're like, they'll come and join you as you go on the march, but at least you can get started, young Washington, to, start cutting the roads on your way up there, and to start, making leeway on this expedition. So Washington, starts on his way. And it's also to be noted too, like Washington has all these, has equipment with him to continue to blaze the roads and everything. He also is carrying with him, 9 swivel guns.
Oh, heavy artillery.
Right.
The big guns.
Right. So
that's cool.
Parker, do you know what a swivel gun is?
Was going to just, can you please?
It's not a big gun.
So a swivel gun is basically, it's like, you might also refer to it as a half pounder. Like, so it's shot as like, that big
They're
around.
the small little guns you see on ships a lot that they just like whip
Are
around.
you serious?
Yeah. They're used for clearing ship decks. Like if you're being boarded or something like that. So that's the artillery that Washington's given. And the reason that he's only given swivel guns is because they don't have like the draft animals to move any larger. And I think too that they're like, well, if Washington gets captured and this whole thing is stillborn,
we're not going to lose a lot of artillery.
We're not going to lose our artillery. We're going to only lose like,
a couple swivel guns.
Nine swivel guns.
This is interesting.
Yeah.
And this isn't Men in Black where like the swivel gun is the noisy cricket.
Right.
The swivel gun
Noisy
is just
cricket.
a small gun.
No, though they do come into play later.
I mean, I wouldn't want to be on the business end of one. I'll just say that. But
Well, I mean, I guess if
it's not a siege gun. It's not a 6-pounder.
It's literally like that big around.
100%.
Yeah, it's a half pound shot.
Next time you come to the fort, I'll show you. We have one.
So
It's a child's gun.
all right, yeah.
This is America. We have child size
It's like a glorified shotgun. Is sort of the
Okay.
best way that I can describe it. But so Washington says on March 31st, he said at this time we have like troops quartered in Alexandria under my command, and we're ready to march them towards the Ohio, there to help Captain Trent. So we're going to go up and we're going to help and we're going to defend the possessions of His Majesty against the attempts and hostilities of the French. So on April 2nd, Washington wrote that everything being ready, we began our march according to our orders, the 2nd of April, with 2 companies of foot commanded by Captain Peter Hogg and Lieutenant Jacob von Braun, 5 subalterns, 2 sergeants, 6 corporals, 1 drummer, and 120 soldiers and one surgeon and 1 Swedish gentleman.
Hell yeah. Everybody needs one of those.
Yeah, just like we have all this other stuff that we need.
George is like, are we ready to go? Are we ready to go? We got the guns. Who's got the Swedish gentleman? It's the chef. I'm sorry, Henrik Lundqvist. Don't be mad at me.
Right.
You know the jokes already. Anyway.
But so and the other thing too is like with a couple of these guys, they're all members of sort of the Ohio Company of Virginia, like the officers' corps. A lot of them are members of the Ohio Company of Virginia. A lot of them too are just like sort of, they all kind of know each other. They run in the same circles and that kind of thing. Jacob von Braun, I think, is probably, and he's a guy that I kind of want to highlight because we're going to talk about him later. Jacob von Braun he served in the Dutch military. He has military experience. He also taught George Washington fencing. So he's like one of George Washington fencing coaches. He also speaks French.
That's pretty cool.
He speaks French fluently. So I guess the idea is if we run into the French, he's going to be our interpreter.
He'll be our translator.
He's going to be our translator and that sort of thing. And the other thing I want to point out too is the surgeon. I think the surgeon's story is really cool. His name is Dr. James Craik. So Dr. James Craik, he is college educated. He went to the University of Edinburgh. He immigrates over here in 1750. First is in the West Indies, but then moves to Virginia. And that's whenever he's living in Norfolk, he's commissioned in the Virginia Regiment on the 7th of March, 1754. So during the French and Indian War, like after the Fort Necessity campaign, he is stationed in Winchester. But the cool thing is that he ends up during the Revolution. Like he's this really just cool character that keeps coming up. Craik held, among other posts, that of chief physician and surgeon of the Continental Army. He was a frequent visitor to Mount Vernon, especially when there was an illness in the family among the enslaved, and accompanied George Washington on his journey to Ohio and Kanawha Rivers in 1770 and in 1784. And then also he attended George Washington in his last illness.
Oh, is he the guy that killed him?
Oh,
no,
yeah.
I don't think James Craik is the guy that
bled him to death?
Bleeds him to death. But it's still just this cool character where it's like he's with Washington at the very start of his career, and then like is with Washington
all the way through.
Right.
That is kind of
so like
neat.
that's just like and that's one cool thing with the French and Indian War, but also like just with the Fort Necessity campaign is you start to see these names that you're like, oh, like this person's gonna continue to play an important role like all the way through.
Yeah, in the next 2 years,
18th century American history.
You're right. In the next 2 years, between the two big campaigns of 54 and 5, you're going to start to come across a lot of names.
Right.
Yeah, man.
Right.
I just get this. If he walks in the room, some other doctor's been in there, and he's like, "How much did you bleed him? How much blood?
Right.
By God, that's too much."
I said 2 quarts, not 2 pints. 2 pints, not 2 quarts.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
Somebody comes walking out with like 2 buckets of blood.
It's like, this is what you wanted me to bleed in, right? But so Washington sort of starts out, he makes his way roughly through like what is today like Loudoun County, Virginia.
Okay.
And then through into like what is today like modern day Harper's Ferry, making his way out to Winchester. And there's a sort of a famous road that kind of dates all the way back to even the Native Americans, and it would be a pretty strong thoroughfare sort of through the area. Today it's like modern day Route 9 through Virginia.
Okay.
And
yep.
So if like you're familiar with like Hillsborough.
Yeah,
like
I know
that
pretty
area,
well.
sort of.
We're going to be down that way tomorrow, literally, a little behind the scenes. We're going to be hanging out doing Grilling History with Travis. So if you've enjoyed that episode, it's already been out. Happening the day after we're sitting with this legend, but we're literally going right down to that area. We'll look for George for you.
And so he's like down in that area. He stays like on like people's farms and that kind of thing. He sort of keeps his journal throughout while they're moving through the area. And so like they're all kind of coming together while they're making their way through. But it's on April 20th whenever they start hearing word about what happened up at the Forks of the Ohio. So on April 20th, that's when Colonel Thomas Cressup to order the detachment onto my route, had noticed that the fort was taken by the French. The news was confirmed by Mr. Wart, which I think is probably Mr. Ward, Ensign Ward, the ensign of Captain Trent, who had been obliged to surrender to a body of 1,000 French and upwards, under the command of Captain Contrecoeur, who was come from Venango, in the French, the peninsula, on 60 bateaux and 300 canoe, and who, having planted 18 pieces of cannon against the fort, afterwards had sent him a summons to deport. So Mr. Ward also informed me that the Indians kept steadfastly attached to our interests. So basically meaning that they like followed them like all the way back, probably. And you can imagine like the harassment that they probably got.
I was going to say the Indians that are with them or the Indians that are with the French?
The Indians that are with the French, basically.
So they literally were just like
following along.
They screened them all the way back.
Basically.
Oh, they were probably terrified the whole time.
Right. So Ensign Ward also brought back 2 native men with him who were Mingos. And they may have a satisfaction to see that we were marching with our troop to basically secure the region. He also delivered a speech from the Half King. It was a speech that the Half King gave on April 18th. And the Half King basically says, like, at this time, the governors of Virginia and Pennsylvania, my brother and the English, are coming to basically help us is sort of the best way. And then the belts of wampum are exchanged, and it's effectively, like trying to muster his group of people, his group of Native Americans to sort of, keep the faith.
Sure.
Sure. It's going to be okay. And so
I know this doesn't look good, fellas.
Right.
But it's going to be fine.
It's going to be fine.
Trust me, I have a plan. I'm not going to share it.
Right.
I have a plan.
But so like, obviously this is discouraging news, because the hope was that like Washington just got to basically show up and a fort was built and he just got to set up his little swivel guns and, they got to play fort and all that kind of stuff. But, that's, basically, that's very discouraging news. 'Cause now it's like, okay, well, we might have to wrestle this back from the French.
It just got real.
Right. It's like, yeah.
Not a joke. Like for him, it's like, okay, this might end in a fight.
Right. And for a more seasoned officer, if you're hearing that like 18 pieces of cannon, they now have a fortification, they have like, all of this material, all these troops, a more seasoned officer probably would have said like, okay, we're going to hunker down somewhere
like here
in Winchester or, or up in Cumberland, and start fortifying there. So that way we can sort of start to build a bit more of a force. But I think Washington being like, I got to please the boss.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to keep going. We're going to forge forward.
Question for you. In this moment, right, we are basically talking about a huge section of Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
We haven't mentioned the Pennsylvania colony a lot. Like, where is their interest in this? Like, they're in their colony technically, right? It's like, or maybe not, but
I mean, what we would consider today part of Pennsylvania.
Right. That's all right. That's why I kind of backtrack, because the rest of what I actually am trying to ask is like, we are independent colonies.
Yeah.
And obviously we were kind of a moment ago discussing Virginia being the colony.
Yeah.
Maryland's here, Pennsylvania's here, New York's not far away. Obviously, New York has sent, the independent companies, things like that. But like, as this news breaks for Washington and his men, is there no thought to go and include anybody else other than Virginia, or is his thought just Virginia?
Well, I think
go to Maryland, try to get the Maryland forces.
Right. No. Yeah, Maryland forces don't exist quite yet.
Right, no, but it's like, call on somebody. Like, there are troops in places. Militias exist.
And so that's why Dinwiddie sent out the letters to all the various colonies to try and get that support. And I believe, knowing that the independent companies of New York were coming and the independent company of South Carolina were coming, like, I believe the idea was like, just keep moving. And if you keep moving and if you keep the mission going, well, they'll meet up with you and you'll get reinforced.
Okay.
And so like they continue marching on their way, making their way basically up through like modern day Cumberland, making their way up the mountains until finally they make it to the Great Meadow. And the Great Meadow is a natural meadow that used to be a lake during the Ice Age. And then over time, the lake drained off and it left this natural meadow. And the meadow is important. There's like 2 meadows. There's the Great Meadow, which is, where he inevitably ends up building Fort Necessity. But then there's also the Little Meadow, which is in modern day Grantsville, Maryland today. And these two meadows are significant because it's one of the only places along this entire march where there's any sort of grass or fodder for the draft animals.
Okay. Super important.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that with the Great Meadow, it's a nice, big, large, open field that's surrounded by a dense canopy of old growth forest. It has two streams. So it has Great Meadow Run and Indian Run. And Washington describes these two streams as basically being natural entrenchments is how he refers to them. He also refers, and this is, again, kind of just shows like the bravado of him or whatever. Or not, I don't even know if bravado is the right word, but kind of like I'm ready to fight. I'm on an adventure. Is he says that, and it's probably he's like half-hearted as well, but he also says it would be a charming field for an encounter.
Yes.
I'm sure.
Referring to the Great Meadow.
Foreshadowing.
This is his first time in this meadow, yes. He doesn't go through this same place with Christopher Gist?
No, so basically they had already kind of like reconnoitered like sort of the route with Gist.
Because is it one of these two streams that he falls in and Gist saves him?
He falls in the Youghiogheny.
Oh, okay, so that's later.
That's earlier. That's in 1753.
I meant later in the Path West.
Yes.
Sorry.
Later in the future?
Earlier in the timeline, later in the map, if that makes sense to anybody. My brain is weird. I'm sorry.
Later in the past.
You know what I'm saying.
So he is starting to establish himself, basically in the Great Meadow. He sets up an encampment there. And then also too, with that being a nice big open field, he sort of is like, okay, well, like this would be a good jumping off point. We can build like a storehouse here.
Okay.
And that sort of thing to like just have as a
base of supply.
A checkpoint.
Yeah.
And so
a base of operation.
Right. And so he builds a storehouse and then they also set to like kind of clearing the meadow so that way they can make it a decent place to like set up, encampments and everything like that. And at the same time too, he's sort of sending out scouts and everything like that to sort of figure out like what's going on with the French. What are the French up to? And so he's sort of sending out his scouts.
Real quick, in the Great Meadow.
Yeah.
How far are we from the nearest known French entities? Is it the people that have just taken, Ward's position at Trent's Fort? Is that the closest known?
Yeah.
Okay. So what are we talking like at this point? 40 miles?
Yeah, it's between like 20 and 40 miles away, but it's like through rugged terrain.
Yeah, no, it's not like they're going to be here tomorrow, but it's like close enough that it's like we're in the series.
Right.
Space.
It's like a couple days, march.
Yeah.
So it's like they sort of are aware of each other. And of course at this time too, like you have to think about it. Like when you look at the French, they're kind of like gracefully moving through the water and then like sort of just sending out scouts through the forest. And meanwhile, the Virginians are just like, just like chopping their way to build a supply road for George Washington. So it's like,
we know where they are.
Go find out where the Virginians are. It's like, well, they're right over there.
Yeah, and you see all that noise and rockets.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it's no secret, It's
the 3rd Virginia Chainsaw Company.
Right.
Okay.
And so it's like effectively they like know like exactly where they are and so but basically it's like Washington wants to kind of keep his momentum going and he is also waiting for his reinforcements to come. So he's kind of like holding out in the Great Meadows is sort of the best way to think about it. So it's in late May where the Half King basically shows up and sort of starts sharing that the French are sort of moving around. And Christopher Gist is one of the first people to then basically come to Washington early in the morning, and he told us that Mr. LaForce and 50 men whose tracks had been seen 5 miles off, because Christopher Gist still has his plantation. He has a home that's up in the area that's actually past the location of the Great Meadow. So Christopher Gist
further west.
Yeah. So Christopher Gist is still like living up in there. And he says, they had been past his plantation the day before. They, ran off with like a cow. They killed a cow. And they broke everything in Christopher Gist's house. If two Indians whom he had left in the house had not persuaded them from their design, I immediately detached 65 men under the command of Captain Hogg and Lieutenant Mercer to basically go and search for this.
Lieutenant Mercer,
not Hugh Mercer.
Okay,
no,
I'm sorry. Mercer's Company.
Yeah, like Mercer's
sorry,
Company,
sorry.
yeah.
I hear it, I get excited.
Yeah.
But then I'm not excited about it anymore.
The problem is he sends them in the wrong direction.
Oh no!
So he sends the 65 guys in the wrong direction. That's like half of his force. He sends in the wrong direction.
Oh God!
Because then he gets word from the Half King that the French are the other direction, and so Washington's like,
Washington's like crap,
right? And he's basically and basically he's like, oh, but they're on their way. They're gonna try to assassinate me. They might try to assassinate you. Like, I don't know what their designs are. And now Washington, I think, is probably like freaking out a little bit.
Paranoid.
Because he just sent half of his force in the wrong direction.
Sure.
So he's like...
It's a bold move, Cotton.
Right. And so he's like, well, somebody's got to do something. I guess I've got to do something. And It's me.
I'm in charge.
Right. And so
22-year-old me.
He decides to set out. But like, here's the other thing to consider. The French are obviously very aware of Virginia's intentions and like what Virginia is doing and the fact that like it's like a sizable force, because at this point too, like word is starting to make it back to Contrecoeur, and like they're like probably that word is like there's a few hundred Virginians with more on the way, and but Contrecoeur only sends like 50 soldiers, or it ends up being less than 50, but like but Washington hears that they're sending 50 soldiers. So it's like, why would you send such a small force to take on what the French may have perceived as, a couple hundred Virginians, and you send like 50 French? So a smarter officer and a more experienced officer than Washington probably would have been like, oh, well, they're only sending like 50 guys. I can't imagine that they have any expectation to like try and take us.
Yeah.
Like we're set up. We're
plus we have 18 guns.
No, they have 9 swivel guns.
Sorry.
The French have 18
No,
guns.
that's what I mean. Isn't this the French commander saying this?
What? No, so this would be like Washington being a more experienced.
I thought you meant like the French who are more experienced.
No. Washington, if he was a more experienced officer, probably would have assumed like, oh well, if they're only sending like 50 guys.
So the French are only sending 50 guys.
Yeah.
Oh, they're not coming to fight.
No. And they're not. They're
that should have been
not.
right. So now I'm driving. This should be Washington's first clue that this is not a fight.
Yes, because
this is something different.
Yeah, in actuality, Contrecoeur basically sent.
I just tripped over that.
No, you're good. He sent LaForce. He sent de Villiers, out to basically. He sent them out to basically give a summons to be like, okay, you're on French territory, like you need to go. And so it is like legitimately, it is a diplomatic mission that's being escorted by a military escort.
Sure.
But Washington being a young, naive officer and being up there, like he's surrounded, he has some experience like wilderness guides and stuff with him, and like he has his core, which
real quick for a modern person who's like, well, why would you send diplomatic missions surrounded by the military? We do it today. How do you think our diplomatic missions get overseas places?
Right.
The military escorts them over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to say that this is not an abnormal diplomatic behavior.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the other thing too is like, if it was that they were coming to like kill all the Virginians or whatever, like they would have sent a much larger force than just like 50 dudes.
There are French Marines. They're not French Navy SEALs.
Right. And not only that,
that's good. I like that.
That term of even French Marine. That's Troupe de la Marine, which literally just means like troops that are associated with like
the Navy force,
colonial troops. Not even
because
Marine even refers to like basically just colonial forces.
Okay.
And so like, don't take it sort of as like Marines as what we would think of today as a modern day Marine.
Yeah, that was definitely the American to me showing.
Yeah. So they're not like modern Marines. Like they're basically like regular British or regular French soldiers, but they are
North American
basically
based.
Yeah. It's sort of like they are because at this point too in the French government, it's basically like like essentially not the Navy, but like kind of like the Board of Trade and everything like that is managing like the French colonial holdings as well. So that's sort of the way to think about it. So
last dumb question, because I'm not sure this is even relevant, but it's in my mind now. Are the relationship between France and its colonists similar to the England and its colonists in the like we're not the same? Or do they see more kindred, like they're French over there?
I would say that because the other thing too is like you have to think about like the idea of like, you know, like British American individualism and all that kind of stuff. And then it ends up turning into like Americanism, individualism.
Yeah.
Because the other thing too is like in New France, again, it's like because everyone's connected with, you know, through Catholicism and everything like that, there's more, I would say, like loyalty sort of to like the overall cause. And the other thing too is like if we want to even look at it in like through the military lens, like already at this point in New France, there's this system of cadets that's been established for, you know, decades at this point, you know, going back into the 1600s, where it's like specifically training, you know, these young officers from New France in the ways of like, you know, like North American fighting and going out and like with Native American war parties and things like that. And so it's like, and so there's also just this like a lot of these officers, the core of officers that are fighting in, you know, New France during the French Indian War, like many of them are sort of homegrown officers. So like it's much more, I would say, unified than sort of the idea of like the colonies, like the British colonies, which is, like at this point too, like the British colonies kind of all have their own individual identities of, you know.
Since it sounds like the French have basically invested in their individual colonists, right? They've got this cadet system. They've built up a fighting force. They've, you know, if they had the numbers, just to ask you in a simple sense, do we think the English would have won this war? It sounds like the French are more prepared to fight in North America. They've developed North American fighters. They've adapted to what, you know, the Indian mode, right? Mm-hmm. But they've adapted to this new way of fighting. It seems quicker.
That's if you just take into account just like fighting forces and skill.
Okay.
When you start taking into account supply lines and when you start taking into account,
there's no world where the English lose this war, probably.
Perhaps if France like decided to like throw more, but whenever France gets dragged into the war on the continent, it's, you know,
it's over.
It's basically it's basically like they're,
and we can visit that a different day, but it just the way you were describing this sort of like investment in the development of things, I was like, man, it just like blows my mind how at the end of the day they are the side that will ultimately lose this not just the war, but this continent. You know, they just seemed like they were more prepared. But anyway, so getting back into it, right? So like Washington, now that I have gone through my thoughts and acknowledged I fumbled, Washington should probably have a clue that this is not an attack coming at him, but
especially since he's armed with the equivalent of like one of those like wooden rubber band shooters.
All right. But yeah, like
9 of those
right here. That's George's artillery.
Right.
Smack.
a swift smack on the back. Yeah, like I would say probably a more like if you heard that there were these 50 guys like on their way towards you, but then you look at your numbers and you're like, well, I've got 100, almost 150 at this point, and more on the way. A more experienced officer would have been like, okay, like I said that this is a charming field for an encounter. I've got these natural entrenchments. I'll just wait here. If the French are going to come, they're going to come. And as of right now, I have like 9 pieces of cannon, because that's the other thing too. It's like, it's not like
he has the initiative.
He does. I mean, like if he would have just hunkered down.
The patience of a young man.
Yeah.
I mean, like
the impatience of a young man. Yeah.
No, but I mean,
well, I
that was the ironic.
Oh, right.
That was irony.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So he's not going to sit in this field, right?
No. And so, you know, it's
50 people. Let's get them.
All right. So it's the night of May 28th. And so Washington basically, he hears word that the French are basically like lying down in this like low lying kind of area. A glen, if you will.
A glen.
and so he's kind of told that like Washington later would use the word skulking that the French were skulking in a low place. It's important to keep in mind too that throughout this night it is pouring down rain. Like it is like kind of like torrential raining like all night long.
Okay.
And you know, when you think that a lot of times weather systems move from west to east, and when you look at the shape of the glen that the French were in, they were largely encamped up against the east facing wall of like a kind of like a cliff face.
Right.
So they're not skulking in a low place. And then not only that, there's even later a French account where they say like we built cabins is the word they use. I mean, think probably more like brush shelters kind of thing.
Sure.
Right.
But they're not skulking in a low place. They're not trying to hide their intention. They're just trying to stay dry.
Literally, yeah.
It's pouring down rain.
Good mid-Atlantic day.
It's pouring down rain, and these are well-experienced, guys to, moving through the woods of North America. So they're like, no, like we're just going to set up like,
yeah, in the natural place to get away from the rain.
Right. But then Washington says that he starts out, he calls it a night as black as pitch. So it's very dark, and it's like so dark too that like even they're even like losing their way along.
Is this
where
pitch black comes from? Did he invent that?
He didn't invent it. That's just pitch,
okay. Just
pitch
like
black.
when you said night as black as pitch, I'm like, wait, is that where the expression? Did he invent the expression?
Yeah, but it's talking about like pitch.
I know.
And and pitch is black.
Yeah.
So if you're just like, but he didn't invent the expression.
That's what I'm asking. I'm just asking, did he invent the expression?
Yeah, they were like, wow, that's a cool turn of phrase.
Yeah, it's like he said it and somebody was like, son of a bitch.
Well, now I have to look
Pitch
that
black.
up.
Write that down. Do you know how dark it is? I heard this guy last summer on campaign. No,
Right.
Anyway, sorry.
But a night as black as pitch is because you have to think like as like the 18th century, like whenever they're talking, it's very wordy, especially when they're writing.
Oh yeah.
So that's probably like, we'd probably be like, yeah, it's pitch black. It's like, no, it's as black as pitch.
But that's what makes the fort's pretty full comment so fun. It's like he didn't even have time for all that flowery. He's like, the fort's full.
Right.
Busy.
I have an update.
Okay.
I asked the Googles on the internets. Where did the phrase pitch black come from?
Vin Diesel.
The earliest known use of the word pitch black is in the late 1500s.
So not George.
Its earliest evidence for pitch black is from 1598 in the writing of John Marston, poet and playwright.
John Marston.
That was my poor attempt at a John Marston.
I got to play that game. All right, so back into it here.
Yeah.
So these guys are not. They're not out here to fight. They're hunkering from the weather.
They're hunkering from the weather.
George thinks they're skulking.
George thinks they're skulking, so he sets out through the night. Of course,
He's pondering the works of John
the
Marston.
night that's pitches black as pitch.
Yeah.
Right. So it's him and one of his captains, Captain Wagoner. They go out with about 50, 65 guys. Sort of like to meet force with force is sort of the way to think about it. And so prior to them getting to the place where the French are encamped, after they stumble their way through the dark, they get to the Native American camp, which is pretty close to the French camp. And they sort of kind of come up with a quick military plan with the Native Americans. So with the Half King and his group of warriors. So they come up with a little bit of a plan to sort of move in. Washington says that we make our way through, through the woods, in the Indian manner. So single file basically. So now he's I'm
now we're skulking.
Right. And imagine too,
Jumanji's who's skulking now?
Right. And imagine too, again, a 22-year-old kid, and he knows that he's something's about to happen.
Oh yeah.
Just imagine just the adrenaline that's pumping, and now it's he's having his military moment. It's sort of the way to think about it. He's wow, I'm in it. I'm about to go.
He has eyes on the French right now.
Yeah, it's I'm about to go meet force with force.
Yeah.
And so they're making their way through. They kind of split into two, I guess altogether maybe three detachments. So there's the Native Americans and their warriors with the Half King. There's Washington's detachment, and then there's Wagoner's detachment. And the Native Americans kind of go up the glen to kind of get to the north side of the glen, as if, because they know that that's likely the direction that if the French go to retreat, they're going to retreat to the north back towards Duquesne.
Which is a correct assumption at the end of this, right? Or at least for those that are able to run.
Yeah. And so, and I think the Half King kind of knows too, he's kind of got Washington in the palm of his hand in terms of yep, I've got him all stirred up. we are like, this kid's gonna do it. Like he's
he's manipulated Washington into this moment.
Right. To like, I think he's kind of hyped Washington up a bit to be like, oh yeah, they're here to kill me. They're here to kill you. Like, and so Washington kind of moves from the south to the north up the Glen.
Getting weird Grima Wormtongue vibes, right? When you just kind of described him there, like the guy that's in King Theoden's all the time.
Theoden moving from the south.
Yeah, just like I was like getting, and I know that's probably not how Tenegrishan is, but like I'm just like, that's the vibe. They're coming to kill you.
Right, exactly. like poisoning Washington's young
like,
Washington.
I gotta get him.
He's like, they're gonna kill me.
Yeah, I gotta you what they are.
They're like,
you're very important.
Tenegrishan's like, they're gonna kill you, and then they're gonna kill me.
Okay, so anyway, so the moment.
And so Washington is moving from the south to the north, like kind of up the Glen. Wagner's company kind of goes up, like basically like up the cliff.
All right.
And so it makes like an L formation where Wagner's company is like literally on the kind of the bluff overlooking the Glen, like looking straight down at the French. And then Washington is moving up the Glen. They form into a battle formation. And this is where accounts vary, but it's very likely that Washington, because you have to think too, like the Virginians are the ones that have been on the move.
Right.
And the other thing too is that the French aren't necessarily, I would say, expecting the Virginians. They're expecting to just like show up in the Great Meadow and give the Virginians their summons there. So I doubt it. It's very, it's pretty much unlikely that the French had any sort of like anyone out on guard duty.
Like no picket or anything like that?
Yeah, no pickets or anything. Because again, they're not like out to fight. They're out to deliver a summons.
It is a little strange though that you would have no guards.
I think it's just because they just...
No, I get it, but it is just slightly strange.
Right. So the other thing too is like it's first thing in the morning. Like the sun has just come up and it's like it's probably foggy. It's been raining all night and it's like late May. Up in the Allegheny Mountains, and so it's probably like there's like
super
misty, foggy and all that kind of stuff. And so the French are the ones that have been sleeping all night, right? Like it's the Virginians that have been up all night and are probably like a little like
wired
for sound,
ready to go. And so by most accounts, Washington is the one who lowers his gun first.
Physically
lowers his gun first. And fires at the French while giving the command at the same time for his detachment to fire. So they start firing up towards the north, towards all the the French that are kind of stuck in this little gully. And I'm sure at that point too, like that's whenever the French immediately start screaming "Anglais, Anglais,"
English,
get to your arms. And because it's like they're struggling to get to their arms and everything like that. It's at that point too where Wagner's detachment just starts opening fire, pouring fire
from above,
like right down on top.
This is where you ruined my joke the other day.
Right? Yeah.
I said Washington's like whatever, and you're like, that's actually Wagner's.
Right?
I was like, shut up.
Yeah. And it's like literally like shooting fish in a barrel.
You
like,
get my joke. But yeah,
it's like Wagner's company is like, or Wagner's detachment is like shooting down at the French while Washington is shooting on them.
Yeah.
So then at this point too, like, and it lasts for about like 15 minutes.
It's kind of much longer than I would think for it, the terrain, the situation. Like you feel like that's going to be over relatively quickly. They basically got the drop on them.
Yeah.
I mean, not even basically. They did.
They definitely got the drop.
They definitely got the drop on them.
And so it lasts for about 15 minutes. And at that point too, like, because you have the Virginians to what would be their right, the Virginians left. You have the Virginians to the French right. You have the Virginians to the French front. It really leaves one direction for the French to sort of start like trying to retreat back in.
Right.
And that's when they start to run to the north, only to then be
intercepted
by the Half King and his in his war party. And so at that point too, probably to the better judgment of the French, they're like, well, if we're going to surrender to anybody, we're going to surrender to the Europeans.
Yeah.
Not to the natives, because the Europeans will understand our terms, like terms.
They understand what ending a fight looks like. We've lost
exactly,
so they're going to let us leave.
So the next part of what happens too is hazy. Basically, even while the fighting is kind of still going on, the French are kind of trying to cease fire and saying like, we have a message, and they're trying to
like show like, hey, we're not actually here to fight you.
And so it's at this point where several French soldiers have been wounded. Like a fair number, like between like 10 and 20 French have been like wounded or killed, like they're French casualties. And Jumonville, Ensign de Jumonville, is one of the people that's wounded, but is also sort of the quote unquote quote unquote diplomat to deliver the summons. And the recollections of what happened are hazy. They come from a couple different sources. One of the sources being Washington himself.
Right.
But what happens is that the Ensign de Jumonville is killed. Washington kind of underplays it. Washington would say, "We killed Mr. Jumonville."
That's pretty glib.
I'm looking at that quote now, and I was just thinking that. I was like, oh, isn't that the understatement of the year?
Yeah, we killed him.
Yeah, he's dead. Sorry. Not sorry.
That sounds like he died in battle.
Yeah.
Yeah, that man was schwacked.
Yeah. And so he says, that he killed him. Things start to sort of progress from there. So there's a couple different accounts. One of the accounts is from one of the few people that was the one person on the French side of things that was able to escape.
Okay.
And he likely escaped because his morning.
I was going to ask, is this the guy that was off sitting down?
We can only assume
taking his morning constitution.
That his morning movement. His morning movement probably had him away from the rest of the French.
He said "merde" and then "thank God."
Right. And so he
and then he did it
because he's able to make it away scot free. Like he makes it all the way back.
He's like not even injured at all.
Yeah,
he's not under arms though.
Right. And so he witnesses everything, and then he's able to make it all the way back to where he's able to then tell his account of what happens to Contrecoeur at Fort Duquesne. And then there's another account of the battle, which honestly probably is probably the more truthful account, which is from a man. He's an Irishman named.
Well, so it's good.
Yeah.
The Irish definitely don't spin yarn.
He's an Irishman named Robert Shaw, and he's not at the Battle of Jumonville Glen.
So he knows everything.
Right. But
he says, believe me, I wasn't there, but I can tell you everything about it.
Right. But he hears probably everyone's recollection of it,
sure.
Like when they get back to camp. And then he ends up giving a deposition in South Carolina, after he may, obviously after they make it back eventually to back to Virginia and everything like that. And in his deposition, he basically says that while Washington is trying to communicate with the French officer, at that point, that's whenever the Half King comes up and basically says, "You're not dead yet, my father," and then using a war club, bashes Jumonville over the head, and then supposedly bathes his hands in the blood and brains of the Ensign de Jumonville.
Oh, slow heavy metal.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the reason for that is the Half King kind of feels like the French kind of stole everything from him with kicking.
Yeah.
Because he also viewed what would become Fort Duquesne, what was Trent's Fort,
as his. He
laid the first timbers. And he even would state this is as much a Virginian fort as it is a native fort as well. And so he very much viewed it as his. And then the other thing too is that's where he was going to derive a lot of his power from and a lot of his influence from over the natives in the Ohio country.
Right.
And the French took that all away from him.
That was the plan. That was
right.
I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm going to murder this guy if I get a chance.
Right. And then the other thing too is and they also murder probably some of the other casualties and things like that.
Do we know how Washington feels about the murder of Jumonville? As far as do we know how he feels about this?
I'd say the fact that he says so little is probably speaks more.
Yeah.
Than,
the silence speaks more.
The silence speaks more.
I've got this scene, Bradley Cooper in the Hangover. We f***ed up.
Yeah.
It's we f***ed up.
Yeah. And
does he spend much time kind of like, he's known for the Revolutionary War, he's known for being the president and stuff. Does he really recollect this time in his life later on?
Oh yes.
We'll get back to that later.
Okay.
Sorry. I went full dark. I was Graham Greene just in my mind real fast.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah, we'll get back to that later.
No, great. No, I'm looking forward to it.
But so he even says, we killed Mr. de Jumainville, the commander of the party, as also 9 others. We wounded 1 and made 21 prisoners, among whom were Monsieur Laforce, Monsieur Darion, and 2 cadets. The Indians scalped the dead and took away the most part of their arms, after which we marched on with the prisoners and the guard to the Indian camp, where again I held a council with the half king, and there informed him that the governor was desirous to see him and was waiting for him in Winchester. So like basically like
Dinwiddie has summoned Tenagrishan or Washington.
So the half king.
Okay.
Sounds like, yeah.
But it also like, also seems like, and Dinwiddie wants you to go. Like,
Oh, so maybe not really. Just trying to leave me right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
But basically he wants the half king to be like a messenger for like a couple other native tribes as well, to try and get like additional support.
Oh, he's trying to like usefully get rid of him.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is where sort of like Washington also says like, that the prisoners informed me that they had sent with a summons to order me to depart. And then he says, a plausible pretense to discover our camp and obtain the knowledge of our forces and our situation. And he says that with an exclamation point. It was so clear that they were come to reconnoiter what we were, that I admired at their assurance when they told me they were come as an embassy. For their instructions mentioned that they should get what knowledge they could of the roads, rivers, and all the country as far as the Potomac. And
that is literally what you did.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Right. And he says, and instead of coming as an ambassador publicly and in an open manner, they came secretly and sought after the most hidden retreats. More like deserters than ambassador. Like Washington's like
indignant.
Yeah, Washington like
he's misreading this entirely.
Well, no, I think he's trying to.
Oh, he's definitely trying to change
CYA.
the perception of it. Yeah, he's definitely trying to play cover my buns.
Right, because he's at the end of the day, like while he is so young and everything like that, like he is like a scholar of sort of like military. He's like read lots of books on military doctrine and everything.
Stupid.
No, and so I think he realizes like, oh,
he also knows he lost control of that
Right.
moment, and he's going to be held responsible for it.
Right. But so he though is already like he's like claiming that they're spies. They're claiming that all this. He says that the summons was so insolent, and to have suffered them to return, I couldn't have suffered them to return. It was, in my opinion, it was the opinion of the half king in this case that their intentions were evil, and so now he's kind of throwing the half king under the bus. Like, oh, the half king said
he drove this more than me.
That's right. He said that they were the evil ones.
Right.
But. It goes on from there, and so
half king, more like half ass, right?
Yeah, right. Am I right, guys?
Yeah, that's how Washington actually talks.
And, and all these like guys that already were like teasing Washington and everything like that are like,
no, man. Yeah, we're not actually with you.
This doesn't look.
This
good.
one's on you, Chief.
Right.
They call him Chief.
Right.
You know why they call him Chief? Because he likes chicken and beef.
There you go.
You're welcome. You can use that forever now, Parker.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to.
So honestly though, like while things were already like kind of not going great for Washington, like during this entire time, his officers as well have been complaining about everything. And like Washington has to like remind them like, it is your honor. It is your duty. We're serving, Virginia. And
he has lost command.
And well, like, he still is like
he's
maintaining
losing it,
a bit of order. And honestly, he's able to kind of wrangle his men back in when he like,
is he?
Yeah. When he says like his officers corps, because his officers corps are kind of like, man, this is kind of half baked. Like, this is stupid.
Well, because they care about things like honor. But meanwhile, me in my slots,
Joe Schmo
does not care.
Right.
I have no honor. I have no coat.
Right. But the other thing too is if you could just like, and you can see all these letters if you go onto founders.archives.gov, you can, and just like, you can see all the letters between Dinwiddie and Washington, of which there are a lot.
I bet.
Like Washington is like constantly sending letters, and basically gets to a point where Dinwiddie, and this is a direct quote, he says, "I am tired of these ill-timed complaints."
Oh, that's all this man is doing.
Right. But it's like, he's like, but the funny thing is like him saying like, I'm tired of these ill-timed complaints. It's like after like Washington sending letters, like things are falling apart. And it's like, deal with it. I'm tired of your stupid complaints. Like just figure it out.
These are you problems, George.
Right.
That's why I put you in charge so that you would deal with this and I can just get back to whatever it is I do.
Right. And so like at the same time, we're kind of moving now through the end of May into the beginning of June. By June 6th, the prisoners make it down to Winchester. So now like word of the incident at Jumonville Glen is like really starting to spread. But this is where things continue to get bad because Christopher Gist returns to the Great Meadow and is like, hey, I just got word from Cumberland. Well, it's not Cumberland at the time. But I just got word from Wills Creek. Colonel Fry fell off his horse and broke his neck and he's dead.
Oh my God.
Oh, by the way, you're Colonel now, Washington.
Oh my God.
You're 22 years old and you're Colonel. And Washington, I'm sure, is probably like,
this could not be a worse moment.
Right. And then
he's just screaming like Kevin McAllister.
Right, yeah. And then at the same time too, like around that time, that's when like the Half King kind of shows up back at the Great Meadow, but now he has a bunch of like women and children and stuff with him, and like Washington's like, I want,
like, what is this?
Like, I want warriors, not a bunch of women and children.
Yeah, what are you gonna do? Throw your kids at him?
Right.
Well, if they're anything like the women and children we talked about in the last episode,
true.
That might be very helpful.
True. All right. So, yeah. So things like are not going well. And then it's kind of around this time as well where Gist says that he met a French deserter that says like there's like 500 French that are going to come down here and like basically like knock your teeth in.
Has this pursuing force been dispatched from Duquesne yet?
No,
Okay.
not quite yet. Because again, we're in early
like
June.
We're barely after it.
Right.
Right.
And so Washington, fearing that the French are immediately coming out to get him, hunkers down and really kind of sets to fortifying his storehouse at the Great Meadow a little bit more. And he's sort of like just hunkered down. He's waiting.
Did he remain at the Meadow while the prisoners went back to Winchester? So
Yeah.
he is ever present in the Meadow almost almost or entirely the whole time.
Yeah, like entirely the whole time. So he's basically like holding out. He's holding out at this point in early June in the Great Meadow, sort of like waiting for an attack. He also receives word in early June that the rest of the Virginia Regiment is on their way, which that's another 150 soldiers. That's going to bring the Virginia Regiment up to a strength of like 300.
Okay. Plus New Yorkers, plus South Carolinians?
Well, so yeah, so they're still kind of in the workings, they're in the woodwork and all that kind of thing. And so he hears that he's getting these reinforcements. And he knows that he's to start expecting, reinforcements to be on their way. But at the same time, he's also getting intelligence that it's like, oh, the French are like a party of the French. They're on their way. They're, so close. They, this, that, and the other thing. But it's in that time that the rest of the Virginia Regiment shows up at the Great Meadow, sort of like in like mid-June. And then it's also in that time where the Independent Company of South Carolina shows up to the Great Meadow.
Okay.
So British regular troops.
Yep.
And so Washington sort of like now with his 300 men and then now with a reinforcement of British regular soldiers feels emboldened like, okay, like I'm going to continue my mission. Which is to make it all the way to the bank of the Monongahela at a place called like Redstone Creek and also called Redstone Fort to like basically start building like a forward operating base there to potentially spring on the French at Fort Duquesne.
Quick command question for you: even though the independent companies are independent companies and the regular army, does Washington have command there? Like, how does that work? Where like technically a provincial is in command of a regular army unit.
So at this point,
like, do they not have their own officers?
So the regular unit has their own officers. So they're being led by a man named Captain James Mackay. He's a seasoned officer at this point. And Washington immediately tries to pull rank as soon as they show up to be like, I'm in charge here.
I'm a colonel now.
I'm a colonel.
You might have heard this guy broke his neck.
Right. And the funny thing with the breaking the neck, there's actually a road
Breakneck Road
in Cumberland named Breakneck Road.
Wow.
We were just discussing this and I forget who it was, but they're like, "Did you know that?" It might have been our friend from Boonesboro, but but it was like, "Did you know this?" And we were like, "Yeah, I mean, we know," but it's like just on the nose. It's right, right on the nose.
That's wow.
Yeah. And it's named for Colonel Fry, but
and that's where is that where he did it, or is that just named for?
Yeah. And then there used to be like a wayside there too that was like at this spot, Colonel.
This isn't an arbitrary road.
Colonel Joshua Fry, fell and broke
Here in
his neck.
1754, he went
right.
Ooh.
And so, what ends up happening though is that Washington sort of gets in an argument with Captain James Mackay. James Mackay says like, I'm commissioned by His Majesty the King. I hold my commission from the King. So that means that, I don't need to listen to you. And technically, like, I kind of outrank you because George, of course, is a provincial colonel, not a British regular colonel.
right. I'm in the real army, George.
And Washington gets pretty upset by this. He sends letters to Dinwiddie where he's complaining like, you need to let them know who's in charge here. I'm in charge here. But then he gets like so frustrated that he just decides like, I'm going to move on. Because he needs to keep building his road and everything like that. But the British regulars are like, we're not going to move on.
Right.
That's not our job. Our job is not to build roads. If you want us to build roads, you need to pay us more.
Yeah. We're going to go do the fort thing if you decide to do that.
Right. And so they hang out at the Great Meadow. They stay at the Great Meadow while Washington and his Virginians move forward building the road. And Washington does make it all the way to like Redstone Creek. And then at that point, which is in like modern day Brownsville, Pennsylvania. At that point, that's when finally the British regulars, the independent companies of South Carolina, push up and meet with Washington. So they're all there. And that's when they get credible, they get credible evidence that there is an approaching
French forces out
French force. And we're getting close to the end of June at this point.
Okay.
And so they get really credible evidence that there's an approaching French force. And I think one of the best accounts of sort of this time of the campaign comes from Captain Adam Stephen, who is one of the captains in the Virginia Regiment.
I know him personally. Did you know that?
Yeah. Captain Adam Stephen goes on to also be like a Revolutionary War general. And but he publishes sort of his account of what would happen in the Maryland Gazette.
Great newspaper.
Right. And so it's basically he's writing and it's from a great perspective because like, he's in the officers' corps. And he's kind of trying to like stand up for Washington and all this as well. But basically he says like, we found out that the French were approaching us, kind of created a great panic. And we knew that we needed to fall back because we weren't going to be able to fortify our position that we were at right now. We tried to get the regulars to help carry the baggage, to help carry the cannon, because they're still carrying those swivel guns with them.
God.
And they're trying, and the British refused. The British regulars refused to. They're like, nope, that's not our job.
Yeah, those are your guns.
Those are your guns. And then Washington tries to set an example by taking stuff off his horse and using his horse as like a baggage horse and everything like that. Like he's like loading up his horse.
He's like, give me your coat. See, everybody do their part.
Right. So they start making their way very quickly back to the Great Meadow. And you have to consider as well that at this point, food and rations are scarce.
For everybody or just George's like detached column?
For everybody.
All
Captain Adam Stephen at this point says, he says, our men had been 8 days with little bread instead of a large amount of like food that they expected. So they had long expected to get a large convoy of food, but like at this point, they're going days without appropriate food. So it's just causing everyone to kind of go into a panic.
Yeah, your morale's dropping.
Right.
Yeah, everything.
They make it back to the Great Meadow on June 1st.
July 1st.
Or July 1st, sorry. Yeah, July.
Well, they
time traveled back.
Holy crap.
And they said backwards time travel.
How did they? No wonder they won the war. Every time they lost, they said just start over.
Right. And so they make it back July 1st, and so they sort of hear that that daily expected are reinforcements, specifically the independent companies of New York. And so July 1st, Washington has like a small council of war and realizes that like a good like quarter to a half of his men are so exhausted from not eating, from having to carry these swivel guns around.
Yeah.
That
this was a terrible idea.
Dude, you decided to bring these stupid things.
Yeah.
That basically it's like, all right, well, I could just leave like half the people here and just move on and just go back to Wills Creek or something like that.
Which might be prudent.
But
maybe.
No, I'm going to stay. We're going to defend. And so they take that time to sort of defend the palisade, to build a better palisade, and to mount the swivel guns around Fort Necessity. So now they're just kind of, it's a waiting game. And so on July, and they keep hearing that the French are closely approaching. So on the morning of July 3rd, it's sort of a misty morning, and they know that the French are approaching. The French underestimate where the fort is located in the Great Meadow, and they break through the tree line, and they kind of are quasi formed up. They're probably in like a column. And Washington assumes that them breaking the tree line and like kind of marching into the meadow is like them essentially being like, oh, we want to meet you in the field.
Oh, we're going to do this European style.
Right. So Washington has all of his men, for the most part, come out of the fort, leave their fortification.
Their good defensive posturing.
Good,
decent defensive posturing. Good quotes.
Leave their fortification and meet them in the field. Pretty much almost immediately, the French and their native allies, and the speculation is like that there were between like altogether 600 and 800 French and native auxiliaries.
Oh,
wow.
To Washington's 400.
This is a massive force.
Yeah. And so, like, very quickly, they start to go along the tree line that sort of encircles the Great Meadow. And Washington's like, oh, we need to get back to the fort.
Yeah.
I think we need to go back.
I've made a terrible mistake.
Right. So they fall back to the fort.
I'm never going to get my picture on the dollar bill if I keep messing up.
And then, like, at 9 a.m, like, the firing commences. So, to the credit of Washington, the French commander de Villiers, and
wait, another one? Oh wait, I do know this. Isn't this like his half brother or cousin, Jumonville?
This is Jumonville's half cousin.
Okay, it's
de Villiers.
There's a half king. There's like half cousin, but
Right.
like this is somebody who is directly related to the slain ensign. Is he?
He's his half brother.
It's his half brother. Okay, cool. You just said the name, and I was like, wait a minute, isn't that guy dead in the Glen?
No. So that's Ensign de Jumonville. So and really quickly on that note, like the French know what they're fighting for at this point. Like they are there to fight. Like it's not like we're here to give a summons or anything. It's like no, we're here to fight.
We're here to kick your ass.
Right. One of the things that the French did on the morning of July 3rd, before they get to the Great Meadow, is they stop in Jumonville Glen. And effectively, de Villiers gives a speech to the French that are present and to the Native Americans. And effectively, that speech is like, this is what we're fighting. Look at what the British did.
They murdered our boys.
And he gestures, likely behind him. They never buried the dead.
So they're still there.
I was going to ask. Okay, so they never buried them.
They never buried them.
So these guys are just sitting out.
Their corpses are just there. They've been there now
Animals
for
and whatever.
They've been there for a month. These corpses, and it's very likely that de Villiers recognizes the hair of his half brother on this rotting corpse.
Yep.
In the Glen, and he gives this speech, which basically, essentially, is evidently enough of a rousing speech that everybody like is ready to go.
We're in. We're all in.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they also take time to bury the dead and have a burial service in the Glen on the morning of July 3rd. So then, cut back to,
are they still buried there? Just
they've done archaeology there, and they have not been able to recover any of the dead. But it's one of those sites though that like is so kind of like well preserved and kind of untouched that they really haven't had like a substantial opportunity to do like heavy archaeology there. But there are, whenever I was there a few years ago, there were plans to start digging in the Glen and doing archaeology. Okay. And I think one of their hopes is to potentially find
evidence,
to find remains, to find human remains.
I don't know that they'll be in the ground, but they'll find coats and buttons.
Right.
So I was very curious about that. Sorry.
I mean, that's got to be quite a moving moment, though. I mean, you're not just proverbially standing among the dead; you're quite literally standing amongst the dead, and everybody is aware of the context of this. These guys didn't really even get the honorable chance to defend themselves. They were slain, is kind of the mentality. So, I mean, it's not hard to hit a good inspirational tone here. So if he hits this homer, I'd be ready to fight for him too.
Right. And we're not even officially at war yet.
No,
they're
a couple hours away.
but I guess what I'm saying is like that, not burying the dead, that's kind of unusual, right? I mean, am I wrong?
I mean, it's kind of like a
slap in the face, right?
But it's also sort of like there's a practice that's being done by Native Americans that are on sort of a war path.
Oh, okay.
Where you kind of like leave the dead out, just as almost like a
warning,
like a calling card, a warning.
Let's also be real. You were using the word panic at the end of that moment. There's a lot of like, George is definitely not in control of this situation.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, this is spiraled. So I'm not sure that
Fair
that
enough.
was necessarily even on his mind. It was probably just getting out of here and regrouping.
Right.
So anyway, all right. So they're shooting now.
So back to later in the morning of July 3rd, the shooting has started. The French have sort of set themselves up in the tree line of around surrounding Fort Necessity, and that's, and the name should also be noted as well, Fort Necessity. A lot of people will say, oh, well, George Washington was pretty dumb. He set up in this position. There were, trees that were, close enough that they were within musket range, but the name should tell you everything you need to know. It's Fort Necessity. He never intended to fight there. He intended to have the fight be up towards Fort Duquesne.
Yeah, it's a fort of necessity.
Yeah, and so the whole reason that they're fighting there is just based out purely out of necessity. And one of the reasons that the French don't, especially because they have superior numbers, that they don't just like run in there with scalping knives and tomahawks and just start butchering a lot of them, is that de Villiers does say that the fort was well situated and I dare not make a frontal assault. Because at least at the start of the battle, those swivel guns, of which only 3 get mounted.
Oh my God. So what, they got like 6 useless guns out there?
Those swivel guns are deployed and to some effect. Like they're using them like basically like shotguns, and they're keeping. So I'm sure that there probably was some momentum initially to try and like just run into the fort, but the swivel guns actually are successful in sort of keeping back.
Oh, good.
But they do mention that the guns are silenced pretty early on, because you have to think too, like these guys are, because it's the way that swivel guns are mounted. It's not like you can roll a carriage back, load a gun, and then roll it back up to the wall. It's like these guys are having to like come around the wall, expose themselves to load it. And so the guns are kind of silenced pretty early on, but still it's enough that it keeps de Villiers back and at bay. But it's raining all throughout the day, and by the end of the day, by the afternoon, the trenches are, because again, you're in a drained off lake with a very high water table, so it doesn't take much to raise the water table. And still to this day, if you go to Fort Necessity on a rainy day, the trenches will be filled with water. Okay. And so dead bodies are floating in the water. There's equipment's floating in the water.
Has George been taking heavy casualties from the moment this tipped off?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So
he's I know there's earthworksy type things, but they're basically fully exposed in the middle of this field.
Yeah, and
is George right in the middle with them, or is he?
Oh yeah, George is leading.
Okay.
Is leading the the fight. But the other thing too is while things are not good for the Virginians, things are also not good for the French.
Oh.
So you have to consider, the canopy is only going to keep you dry for so long.
Right.
Until their guns also start fouling. And they also don't have a storehouse full of ammunition and everything else. But the French, are kind of treating it similar to a siege. They kill the draft animals. They kill the dogs. They don't want any sort of potential food source if they're going to try and get wait out the Virginians.
Right.
But the French want to get this wrapped up.
Yeah.
Because there's also rumors that because there's still those independent companies of New York are still out there somewhere.
Oh yeah.
At least in the mind of George Washington. And so they want to get it wrapped up. And so finally they call for a sign, a sign of truce. Because things are bad.
Because the British are down to bayonets basically at this point, right?
Or because the other thing that happens too is there's a tool which is called a worm, which is like a corkscrew, which you use to clean out any kind of fouling or anything
debris
like that.
from the barrels of cannons.
In the barrel, not the barrel, for the guns, for the muskets, the muskets that the soldiers are using.
Okay.
And at this point too, because they're out in an open meadow, a lot of the guns are fouling up, and there's wadded up rounds in the bottoms of people's guns that aren't going off, and they only have 2 worms for 500 or 400 men. So they're trying to clean guns to keep guns working.
That is insane.
Adam Stephen writes that because of the circumstances that were going on, he says that about half of the Virginia regiment breaks into the rum ration and just starts getting drunk,
just getting hammered
because they think that the end is near, that they're going to die. So
makes sense.
Things are not going well, and so that's whenever the French ask basically for parley.
That Irish guy was in that group.
Yeah,
he said, "Come on, boys."
Yeah. Robert Shaw.
Robert Shaw said, "Come on, boys, the ship's going down here."
So things aren't going well. So they call for parley, and this is where they send Jacob van Bram, our friend from earlier, the Dutchman,
our Dutch translator,
who can speak French. They send him out to basically get the terms. And you have to keep in mind, the French are rained out. They are probably writing on wet paper using blotted ink that's not spelled well,
fine penmanship,
and everyone on the Virginia side of things is probably hungry. They're probably a little slap happy from just
getting shot at as much as they have
and all the work that they've been going through and everything like that. So Jacob van Bram probably wasn't probably in his best mindset for translating the Articles of Capitulation.
So is von Braun, when this fighting starts, sequestered? You might have to negotiate, so go hide somewhere. Or is he out there fighting?
So they're, because the best way to think about, any fort really, but especially Fort Necessity, is it's almost like an onion in terms of how it's situated.
Right.
So you have the natural entrenchments on the outside, the Indian Run and Great Meadow Run, which are the outside works of the fort. Then you have the palisade, the breastworks, and then on the inside of that you have a circular stockade.
Right.
And then inside of that you have a cabin, a shack. And so
there's
probably people in and out of the cabin. I'm sure Washington and Captain McKay are probably in sort of the core of the onion, as it were. And so So Jacob von Braun comes back sort of with the terms of surrender. And this is where something happens in the translation. And Washington is not explicitly said or explicitly told that like he's being made the assassin of a French diplomat. Like that's like literally that's what's written in the capitulation is that, and Washington takes the blame for being the assassin of a French diplomat.
He's what the French call les incompetents.
Yeah. Les incompetents. And so, and whether it's von Braun, like just does a really bad job of like remembering like how the terms were just read to him or whatever, basically Washington is kind of like led astray because the other thing too is like the carrot on that stick with the capitulation is that the carrot, and this is what like I think Washington was kind of hoping for, is that he'll be allowed to surrender his fort with the full honors of war. He'll be allowed to take a ceremonial piece of artillery. Yeah. All of his men can leave with their flags flying and everything along those lines. And so I think like Washington probably like kind of also latches on to that part. And the other thing is that ends up happening is that the French want a couple prisoners because of the prisoners that the
British took.
The British and the Virginians took back to Winchester.
I should say Virginians, you're right.
And so Washington's like, this might be a ruse. What if they know that our New Yorkers are just over the next hill? Like, so, you know, maybe, and so like he kind of decides to like wait it out a little bit.
It's like, maybe I'll sign this in an hour.
All right. But then finally, like, I think he's convinced like pretty well, like, no, you should just meet these terms.
Do it now.
Sign this. Like, let's just get out of here. So they sign the capitulation, and the official capitulation of the fort is on July 4th, 1754.
Not ironic.
Not ironic.
Not ironic at all.
Not ironic at all.
Which is funny, Parker, because you asked, does George, look back on this, think about this often? And it's not just my favorite. It might be the only like really good documentary made about the French and Indian War.
Oh yeah, it's good.
But it starts literally with this juxtaposition because
it's the war that made America.
It is the war that made America.
Yeah.
It's narrated, hosted by Graham Greene. It's PBS. R.I.P. PBS. We love you. But it basically starts with Washington on, was it July 8th? I think technically is the date. But it's when, the Declaration is being read to Continental forces. And he remarked either in his journal or whatever, but he's like, there isn't a day that marks this occasion or whatever in my life that I don't think about 20 years back.
All right.
How I basically escaped with my ass in the Great Meadow. So yeah, it's on his mind.
Good.
The thing that makes it even better is that the letter that he's writing is to Adam Stephen. So his comrade, his brother in arms.
So what that letter at the beginning of the war that made America, that's to Adam Stephen?
Yeah, it's to
cool.
Captain Adam Stephen.
Somebody who was there.
Also
that's even better.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then he also talks about he basically says like, I can't let this date go by without thinking about our great escape. And so he's being like self-referential. And then the other thing too is he goes back to visit the Great Meadow site a couple different times. He actually buys the property.
Yes.
Buys the land that the Great Meadow is on. And so that's whenever he goes back out that way in like in 1770 and stuff like that. And so, but yeah, so Washington, at this point, because the French wanted those prisoners, Jacob von Braun is one of the prisoners that's taken by the French. And Jacob von Braun would remain in French custody, I think, until like 1760 or something like that. So for like
6 years.
Wow.
Damn.
Like up in Quebec.
Wow.
But when Washington gets back to Williamsburg and they're sort of asking for a full report, like the capitulation, the articles of capitulation have also kind of like started to come out at this point. And I guess like people, realize that like, obviously Washington has admitted to being the assassin of a French diplomat. And not only that, like that's like basically like what the French wanted as well. They wanted Washington to admit to that. So that way they could take that also back to
laid into their hand.
Yeah. And take it back to, mainland Europe and basically say like,
this is not how empires act.
Right.
This is
right.
This is beneath civilized people.
And poor Jacob von Braun, Washington basically very quick to throw him under.
Oh yeah, 100%.
He's like, it wasn't my fault.
I don't speak French.
My translator led me astray. It was Jacob von Braun, and Jacob von Braun, like honestly, because they kind of they honor the service of the soldiers that served on that campaign, like the Virginia House of Burgesses, and his name is omitted from
That's so dirty.
Yeah, so
That
it's
is dirty, man.
Yeah, so poor Jacob von Braun.
Let's take a moment. So you've seen Les Assassins spelled out.
Yeah,
You've seen it spelled out.
Yeah.
I've seen it spelled out. Let's take the atmosphere of all this away for a minute. They're tired. They've been fighting. They're soaking wet. They're frazzled. Did he look at the paper?
I would say that the paper was probably just so like rained on and blotted that I'm sure Jacob von Braun probably just kind of came back.
It was like, sign this, please.
He's like, hey, look, they said we're going to take the blame for kind of coming up on French lands. But they're going to let us go and they're going to give us like great terms and stuff like that. So like, let's,
Well, there's one other avenue to consider too. I mean, this guy, von Braun, maybe he's not so in tune because he's not a military commander, right?
He has
French.
He has military experience,
but he's not like a high-ranking, like forward-thinking international chess move guy.
And the man's a translator.
So he did have previous military experience in the Dutch military, but
because what I was thinking is maybe he's like, it says you're an assassin. Who cares?
Well, there's also another thing too. Like maybe because the other thing to consider is that like it's almost like he's like translating like French to Dutch
and Dutch to English.
Dutch to English.
And there's like, I don't know if it's apocryphal or whatever, but they say like there's not really like a word, in Dutch for assassin.
Okay. I was just trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I just made that up.
I don't have any beefs with von Braun.
I don't have
when I do, and what I was getting ready to do is when I do give my armchair historian beefing, I always am critical. It's like, if you look at the word, you don't even need to speak French. It is nearly spelled the same in French as it is in English.
And ultimately too, it's like you could argue that like they would never even be in that predicament if it wasn't for Washington being led astray or encouraged by the Half King to even go and assault the French in the Glen. So it's just like one of those things that like, obviously,
you gave a child a bunch of power and weapons. What did you think was going to happen? A mess was made.
Right.
Literally. That's a mess has been made now.
Yeah, because I'm sure a more experienced military officer. Because the other thing to consider too is that Virginia really hadn't participated in any sort of like military expeditions or anything like that for decades at this point. And I think the last thing they did was like the Cartagena campaign, which was like, decades prior. And so at that point, like Virginia, there weren't really any people with like active military experience. And like for Washington, like I think one of the things that's most telling about sort of Washington's kind of cavalier attitude about the entire thing is he writes a letter to his younger brother, John Augusta, who he refers to as Jack, about the Jumonville Glen affair. And so in all these other letters where he's like, Jumonville died, we did this, the French were skulking. He writes this letter, which is like, it's almost as if he's like writing like to excite a younger brother, which is exactly what he's doing. And he says, I tell you this, I was at the front of the action.
Oh my God.
I could hear the bullets whistling past my ears and there was something charming in the sound.
Oh my God.
So this is a kid who's not thinking about long-term, I guess what I'm saying is, because I hear
the bullets whistle.
I guess what I'm saying is I don't think Washington's an idiot. I think we talked about.
He's a young kid.
I think he's 22 years old. Man. Even if he saw La Assassin there, which he, if he number one,
that ass is on.
Yeah, exactly.
He's thinking of Sally Fairfax.
Yeah, I've put the ass in assassination. He's like Todd Packer. I'm gonna put the ass in assassination. But like I'm thinking that maybe he saw the, He sees it there and whatever. I'm going to sign it and get my people out of here. Yeah. And he's not forward thinking like, well, hey, the French are going to go back and then, hey, the 7 Years' War is going to start. You know, like I don't think he's thinking that far ahead because he's not there yet.
I mean, you're right. And also this, like, just to take my humor off of this and like be an objective professional for a second. Like, dude, they're exhausted. They like you've been talking about, right? They've been fighting. They're tired. They're getting rained on. There's no food.
They haven't eaten like 8 days.
That's what I mean. There's like no food. Like at this point, I'm not sure there's a lot of rational thought. And honestly, the man has been handed an out. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm gonna take it. Like even at my age, I would take it. I'm exhausted thinking about that story.
8 days without food, getting rained on. No, I'll admit to sinking the Titanic.
So he's got. Not he's got. So the French have taken their piece of paper, right? They've taken it back to Europe, and as we wind down here, obviously the French and Indian War is now exploding out in the open. The French use this. Is this the catalyst? Is this the device? Is this piece of paper the thing they use to open this globally? Is it officially declared in the aftermath? Do the French declare war first? Who opens the official French and Indian War now?
Yeah, the British are going to be, you know, like the official declaration, like wouldn't, because even like when Braddock's campaign starts, it's not technically like full blown official war, at least on paper.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Okay, cool.
And so
the gloves are off in North America, I think, but in Europe they're not.
But it's still okay,
right? And then it's like, you know, and then with that, like in 1755, like that's when, you know, basically you have like the British making an official declaration of war, and especially too like with how badly decimated like the British military is at Braddock's defeat, like literally like, you know, 1 year later in July of 1755.
Yeah.
You know, at this point, it's like it is a full blown war. You know, and then especially too just with like tensions that are escalating back in mainland Europe as well. So you know, basically that's what leads to a full blown war, which would end up lasting 7 years. But
historians are really good at naming things.
Yeah, but what ends up happening though is like, and Pat, you asked earlier about like in terms of like the French and their ability to fight, and especially like as it pertained to North America and everything like that. It's like when the French start to be a little bit more concerned with what's going on in mainland Europe and a little bit more concerned in what's going on in their places where they're making a substantial amount more money than New France, like down in their sugar islands and things of that nature. That's when sort of the things with the war start to shift. But most notably, especially as it pertains to North America, due to some really bad crop failures, New France basically goes into famine.
Wow.
And by like 1758, like things are really bad.
This one was not caused by the English though.
No.
Okay. Because they've got that reputation.
This is just because of poor crop failure.
Okay.
And so because of that, like food is starting to become incredibly scarce for any of the forces that are serving like in North America. You know, for the French, things start to get really bad. It gets to the point where, you know, people are starving to death in Quebec. And it's like by the time that the siege is finally lifted after the Battle of Quebec, like people are like emaciated. Like it's really bad. And so it's really like that, like these crop failures, like these other like kind of natural disasters and things that happen. And then the fact too that like the French are spread, you know, pretty thin and trying to defend all of these forts and everything like that down through the frontier of, you know, northeastern America, it just becomes untenable. And then the other thing too is the British continue to adapt and you know, more money, more material starts being thrown into, you know, what's going on in America. And then that's when, you know, really the tide of war starts to shift because, you know, like the British continue to make these like supply routes, supply chains get much better. Yeah. You have the Americans being much more gung-ho about the war and supporting the war. And then especially because they're getting support from, you know, British Parliament, and specifically, you know, William Pitt to, you know, fight this war, you know, things start to go much better for the British.
Got it.
To then, you know, in 1758, you have like just all of these, you have like just victory after victory, and then going into 1759. And then that's even when like after 1759, when things shift to fighting in other areas where it's like they're pulling now troops out of the Americas to go fight the French elsewhere. And so, yeah, and so basically it kind of turns into just a war of attrition and that kind of thing, and that's where the British are able to obviously take all of North America, but really it's like with the French and Indian War that's what sort of establishes the British Empire, British Empire as like we sort of understand it.
Yeah. When people ask in the forum, they usually ask like, what does the French and Indian War solve? And I say, well, a lot, not a lot. At the end of the day, if you're looking for something simple, as far as empires, it'll be England number 1, France number 2 for the rest of the story of empires on planet Earth.
Yeah.
That's the biggest takeaway. You were getting ready to say, and then I have something for you. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna. I was actually just gonna say now. At what point during the show do each of you look at the respective cameras and say thank you, George? Because now I have a job.
Oh, I mean, we thank. Who do we thank? We thank George. We thank Governor Sharp. We thank President Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of people.
Yeah.
But we've but on a little bit more serious note though, we have in season 2 on the 1/4 3 centuries episode.
Yeah.
And in the past we've referred to the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, as World War Zero or World War -1.
It's like how many different World War Ones were there before actual World War One?
I think we would still consider this one of these not proto World War One, but
it becomes a global war,
a global war for sure, a global conflict.
And I think probably like famously, obviously with the French and Indian War, you have Winston Churchill saying like that was the first World War.
Yeah.
but yeah, so that's
true. Yeah, I forget he said that. Sorry.
It has like massive implications for like how it would end up then shaping sort of like because it's also the French and Indian War that kind of wars are incredibly expensive, especially wars that you're fighting globally, and that basically bankrupts France.
Yep.
Certainly bankrupts England.
It comes close to bankrupting England, which then leads to taxation.
Nothing happens after that.
But it's wild because the repercussions of the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, end up being sort of the things obviously that start the American Revolution,
Yep.
but also the French Revolution.
Oh, that's right.
And by default, like because we just did this on our show, the first Irish revolutions of Wolfe Tone in 1798 are all inspired because of these. Right. So this is a chain reaction happening.
Because basically it's like because of all the money that's like spent on the 7 Years' War, and then money that then is later spent on the American Revolution from the French side of things, but specifically the 7 Years' War.
Right.
It's like you have where a lot of money went to it. It's basically like kind of like bankrupted France, and like that's where the common people are really suffering.
I mean, it really leads to so much. Like it really, this is a war that really does just shape the world as we know it.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
It ultimately will lead to Napoleon selling, I think.
This ties to the last question I had for you before I just say thank you for an incredible story.
Absolutely,
You said a moment ago that the French basically leave North America, but they don't. How the Louisiana colony, right? It's powerful. It obviously survives the abandonment, retreat, the leaving of North America.
Yeah.
Are they in a strong position, or are they freaked out that the English are going to come down and push them out of Louisiana?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things that end up happening as a result. You have the Acadian diaspora,
right?
Yes, where Acadians are
they're sitting under an Acadian flag.
Yeah,
right there.
And I would say that if you want to throw the word genocide out there in terms of like how the British treat the Acadians and like what ends up happening with the Acadians.
I'm good with associating the British and genocide.
Yeah,
I'm on board with that as well.
To remove them from Canada or to basically say like, all right, well, you either convert to the Church of England and you start worshiping to the Church of England and everything like that,
right?
And swear your loyalty to Great Britain, or you're not going to have a home anymore. And the other thing too is that it's a policy too of removing the Acadians and replacing them with new British settlers, and so that's a pretty terrible thing. But then they end up moving down to a lot of them in the Acadian diaspora end up moving down to Louisiana
and become the Cajuns.
And so like I wouldn't say that anyone like down there is like freaking out necessarily, because especially too when you consider just the sheer vastness of North America, especially in that time.
The British aren't really even encroaching that area yet.
Right. And then what ends up happening in 1763 is you have the proclamation line of 1763 laid down by King George III that basically says, no settlers are able to settle west of the Allegheny Mountains,
right.
Appalachian Mountains. And so like with that, I think it's just, honestly, I think the British are just kind of like, there's bigger fish to fry. We don't even want to send troops out there necessarily because again of the supply issues and everything else, to try and have troops out on such a remote frontier.
Problematic.
Right.
At best.
And of course you do end up with like troops out in the Great Lakes region, but that's because it's much easier to move people around the Great Lakes. They can sail around the Great Lakes and everything like that. But it's like, you don't have the British.
One thing they're good at is boats.
Right. So, and then with just the sheer vastness of like, what we think of with like the Louisiana Purchase.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not the concern.
Right. This was incredible, man.
Absolutely.
I think knowing you all these years, basically just as a reenactor who happened to work at Fort Frederick as one of the interpreters, I never really got to witness you as a storyteller. I kind of would hang out there as the Civil War guy on random events, and like we would cross paths mostly during musket demos.
Yeah.
For the record, I did beat you. I have it on film. You dusted me last year in the most embarrassing way, so I'd say we're even. Right. It's filmed.
I witnessed that, by the way.
You did witness that.
I witnessed that.
You smoked me.
Yeah.
But that being said, getting to know you last year was quite a privilege, just because of what last year meant for you in a lot of ways, but just for me in a very selfish way. I love being able to literally just look no further than people I call friend.
Yeah.
For like inspiration and developing myself as a storyteller. So one, thank you for on a personal, professional level every day last summer, and I can't wait to do it again this summer. Just pick your brain, learn things,
Absolutely,
little things, big things, but thank you for doing that for our listeners.
Yeah, and everyone who's listening, I mean, I say this every time I can. With summer coming up, one of the last places you're going to see some of these great storytellers like Jacob, Pat, your parks, your state parks, your national parks. Get out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, come see Jacob and I.
Yeah, and
get out there.
Please go visit Fort Necessity National Battlefield in Farmington, Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful site. They've done a lot of really great work, really great staff that works up there. And not only that, I highly recommend a trip if you're already up there for Fort Necessity and everything like that, to please go visit Jumonville Glen. It is one of the best preserved sites of its kind, in my opinion, in the world. I mean, it's very rare that you get to see like a site that looks almost exactly as it did historically. And so I highly recommend checking that site out. It's all part of the National Park Service, and so yeah.
All right, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get out of here for today. I'm going to pester Jacob for the rest of this summer and see if I can get him to come back next season or after that, just to do another French and Indian War story. Anyone you want, bud.
I hope I wasn't long-winded.
No, dude, this is like what I like is this. This is a story.
Yeah.
This is a story.
Well, and the other thing too is I'm even right now I'm sitting here thinking like, man,
what did I leave out?
Because there is one detail that I left out, which I was pretty bummed about.
Put it in right now.
Right now.
Well, whenever I was talking about like Washington and being upset with his being upset with like who's in charge here and all that kind of stuff, and whenever he's like, I'm gonna take my men and I'm gonna move on. There's Washington's quote in his journal is he said, had some trouble with the wagons. And basically like what that is Washington probably gets ready to make this big display of marching out of the camp at the Great Meadow, and then like a wagon wheel like falls off, like, and that happens.
I'm leaving.
Yeah, and that happens like right in front of like the British regulars, and they're probably like, look at this guy.
Idiot.
Yeah, like, yeah, no, that's like one of my favorite little tidbits.
I picture that scene almost from Die Hard, where I'm in charge here, and then the FBI guy goes, "Not anymore, you're not."
Speaking of Die Hard, dumbest thing ever. We no, like yesterday.
Thank you.
Not yesterday. 2 days ago at work, we were at the wind down the last 10 or so minutes of the day, right before I told you we got crushed type of thing. And Rob and I end up, I don't know how it comes up, but we found in the terrible movie Pearl Harbor, what's the Christopher Nolan, the director?
Michael Bay.
Michael Bay digitally cut in John McClane as an extra in one of these scenes.
Are you serious?
There's a wounded John McClane. So as soon as you said that, I started thinking about it. Bruce Willis walking as a wounded sailor in Pearl Harbor.
That is crazy.
It's funny. I'll show you later. But anyway, look, come out and see Jacob Davis and I at Fort Frederick this summer. Like he said, go visit these very important and very rare French and Indian War sites. Incredible story. Really the war that set us most directly on the path to who we are as the modern American. We'll pull that thread back even further someday. But follow us on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube by searching for the History Things Podcast, sending us emails at historythingspodcast at gmail.com. For a minute, I blanked there. 5-star ratings and reviews really help the show. We've always appreciated that. Keep doing that. We are in the summer blitz. We are in the second half now, as we've said, of season 6. Full speed ahead. You got a Star Trek thing for how fast we're about to go?
Warp speed now.
That was less impressive than I thought, but warp speed it is.
Well, that was
ludicrous speed.
That was from the worst Star Trek movie it was ever.
It's weird that you would go with that. Anyway, for our guest today, Jacob Davis, for my co-host Parker Russell, I'm Pat McGuire. This has been the History Things Podcast, saying we will catch you all later. Goodbye. It's long to pull.